Motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 63(1)(a) of the Public Finance Management Act, Cap 1501, the Act, that the Minister of Finance may, by an affirmative resolution of Parliament, borrow from a bank or another financial institution for the capital or current expenditure of government. And whereas it is further provided under Section 64 of the Act that money borrowed by the government must be paid into and form part of the consolidated fund. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow the amount of US 10 million, the loan, from the International Development Association to replenish the financing gap created by activation of the contingency emergency response component of St. Lucia's unleashing of the blue economy of the Caribbean project. And whereas the service charge is the greater of A, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum, plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and B, 3/4 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance. And whereas the maximum commitment charge is 1/2 of 1% per annum on the unwithdrawn financing balance. And whereas the loan is repayable in 40 years commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years. And whereas the loan is repayable in semi-annual installments on the 15th day of May, the 15th day of November of each year after the grace period. Be it resolved that Parliament do authorize the Minister of Finance to borrow the amount of US 10 million, the loan, from the International Development Association to replenish the financing gap created by activation of the contingency emergency response component of St. Lucia's unleashing of the blue economy of the Caribbean project. Be it further resolved that A, a service charge is the greater of 1, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum, plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 3/4 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn credit balances. B, the maximum commitment charge is 1/2 of 1% per annum on the unwithdrawn financing balance. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years. D, the loan is repayable in semi-annual installments on the 15th day of May and the 15th day of November of each year after the grace period. If I may, Madam President, just provide, as I always do, additional details with regard to this motion. So, Madam President, I will proceed to provide some additional information with respect to this motion to borrow the amount of 10 million US from the International Development Association, the IDA, for St. Lucia's unleashing of the blue economy project known as the UBEC project. Madam President, this is a very important initiative at a very crucial time. We are fully aware of the threats and the challenges that face our agricultural sector at this time. We are also fully aware that food security around the world is under serious pressure, and countries have had to find ways to be able to improve their capacity to provide necessary inputs, necessary equipment, necessary initiatives to actually take care of their own food security issues. And so We know that this situation has been accentuated by the global crisis caused by the Russia-Ukraine war and other challenges brought about by some of the developments around the world that have caused the increase of the price of food and major challenges with imports and exports. And so, Madam President, it is important that we as a government in a small developing island state do what we have to do to improve our capacity to deal with our food security as a country. And so this is necessary to deal with three major areas in our food security in this country, namely the livestock, vegetable production, and fisheries. Madam President, the terms of the loan are very encouraging. It's a 40-year term, basically interest-free, and a service charge of 0.75% per annum. And so that is very much welcome as compared to some of the other loans that we may have considered. Madam President, as referenced in the budget this year of 2024-2025, the farmers and the persons involved in the agricultural sector were promised support. And support has indeed started arriving when it comes to the farmers and what they need. We have seen provision of fertilizer. 3,400 bags were procured, and distribution was effected in a number of communities around the country. And farmers know that fertilizer is a key component of towards assisting them with their production and their yield. By the same token, Madam President, we recognize that when you continue to use fertilizers, application of fertilizers to the soil, and coming from a farming community, I think I understand that clearly. It was banana money that sent me to school. So I know what can happen when you continue to apply fertilizer to the soil. You have issues with soil acidity. And the government has also found it necessary to procure 20,000 bags of lime, what they refer to in Creole as la chaux, to address this issue. And so this program, the UBEC loan, is geared towards providing that kind of support. Madam President, also there is the Contingency Emergency Response Project, which is the acronym, the SERP, which the Ministry of Agriculture is undertaking. And there are a total of about 60 different activities that will be undertaken under that SERP project. And that will include two main issues, that I want to mention, and that is the provision of ice machines in all of the fishing communities and fishing facilities around the country. Additional fads for the fishermen. I think Senator Toussaint will be happy to hear that. And Madam President, these are among some of the initiatives. I just want to reiterate in Creole because this is a very important initiative that I think when the question is asked, what is the benefit of this loan and who is it for, I want to tell our people in the agricultural sector that it is for them. Madam President, je voulais dire que le gouvernement a prêté l'argent à 10 millions de dollars américains pour faire assurer que tout problème nous avons as affaires, provisions, manger et puis tout ça nous besoin comme un pays. Nous avons que l'année a le problème. Et puis dans ces problèmes ça là, nous pas ça corriger tous ces problèmes ça là une fois, mais l'on ça là kay ban nous anti-force pour aider monde qui agricole, pêcheurs, farmers et puis nous kay faire essayer pour faire assurer yoni ça yo ka créer ice machine à toute commune qui ni pêcheur au pays en Slawe, Dennery, Vieux-Fort, Gozile, Soufouyer, Mikou, tout partout qui ni pêcheur, nous avons fait assurer qu'il a ni machine pour yoni la glace pour mettre pêche. Aussi, nous savons que pêcheur, pas pêcheur mais farmer, toujours a besoin de sel pour bailler figue. Et puis le gouvernement a fait assurer que nous avons 34 000 sacs sel qui nous a commencé à aider les femmes pour payer pour lui. Et puis, ça a aidé pour faire les produits plus denrées. Mais, Madame Présidente, nous savons aussi que les cas servi un chai sel, terre qui vient, ça a acidique. Il a venu presque las. Et puis, ça c'est pour raison ça le gouvernement a aussi fait assurer que ces femmes ont trouvé la chaux pour ça mettre à terre pour faire assurer celle-là pas affecter production figure et puis production d'enway. So, Madam President, I have attempted to mention that because sometimes the government assumes that people have a clear understanding of what we are attempting to do, and with some of what goes out from other sources, including the opposition, if you are not very clear about what you're doing, people can begin to confuse those that it is intended for. And so I just made sure that I explain this one in Creole so that those who will benefit from the fertilizer, from the lime, from the ice machines, from the fads, from the fishing aggregates, and all of those understand. Madam President, speaking of fads, we are going to include 10 additional fishing aggregate devices around the various fishing communities. What is the benefit of that? That is going to do two things. Well, actually three, because I heard the Minister for Commerce, who is the MP for Soufrière, accentuate the touristic value. Most of us consider fads as a means of increasing the fishers' yield by ensuring that they don't have to go very far to fish. But there's also aesthetic value in that when the fish come closer to shore, snorkelers and the likes who may be visitors can have the benefit of seeing what the underwater life is like. And so I welcome that, Madam President. What that also does, the less distance the fishers have to go out to fish is the less fuel they will use. And we know what happens with the price of fuel and the concerns that we've had. And that is one way of giving some measure of support and relief to fishers so that they will have to use less fuel to be able to go out there and ply their trade. Madam President, another initiative that this money will be used for is to be introducing new bloodlines for breeding in this country, and we have identified at least some of the agricultural stations, including the one at Volet in Miku North, close to me, for that particular initiative, move towards increasing livestock production. Madam President, in addition, this is a good time of year for one of the initiatives that this project entails, and that is the provision of water tanks. We are in the middle of May, or in the beginning of May, the middle of the dry season, and drought is one of the areas that really, issues that affect farmers, and in areas where we have dry forest and low water, farmers who need serious support with water storage and irrigation. And so 500 water tanks, capacity of 1,000 gallons each, will be made available to these farmers to help them to cope with the effects of the drought. Madam President, we also will be making these monies available for the rehabilitation and provision of greenhouses for farmers. Of course, it is a controlled environment, again, for greater yield for farmers who are into vegetable production, cucumbers, watermelons, tomatoes, cantaloupe, and so on. We know that there is a demand for these products around the island and, of course, for export. But this is a challenge for farmers who don't have large plots of land and only have small spaces within which to do their farming, and that will help them. Madam President, I am pleased to inform the Chamber that part of these monies will also be used to finance the very much needed farm labor program, where we had that program previously under the NICE program. The government came in, didn't see the need to continue it, and the farmers had no support on their farms. Some of them cannot afford to pay people to work for them. We are going to introduce 105 laborers under the Farm Assistance Program, Madam President, and 7 supervisors who will provide that kind of free labor for farmers on their properties. So, Madam President, and these will be distributed around the island, and they will be distributed based on needs, the communities where the farmers need it most, and the areas where they need it most. Madam President, there is also need for us to ensure that there is proper drainage. While we provide water in areas where there's dry forest and dry land, there are areas where when it rains there is excessive water and can cause problems with erosion, land slippage, and damaging the farms of farmers. Where I'm from, Madam President, in the Deriso area, the water tanks might be very helpful for people in an area like Angers that is relatively flat and dry. But when you move further west towards the rainforest, areas like Quelas, Desgatiers, Calypso, Maho, Cilliers, these are areas very close or very much into the rainforest. And there we can experience quite a lot of land slippage, landslides, and so farmers in those areas need support in providing them with drainage, and that is one of the initiatives that this will be provided for, assisting farmers with drainage systems to manage soil erosion and land slippage on their farms. These farms generally are in very slopey areas. The topography of the lands there is not flat, and because of that, there's always a risk that farmers lose their produce when there is rain. Madam President, we will also look at areas where farmers who have specific crops. I remembered the member for Soufrière talking about assistance for the farmers of Fosse Jacques, particularly dashing farmers. And again, some of these people, because of the areas they farm on, their crops are at higher risk. They can lose it, and so there is need for us to provide the support for them there. And by the way, Madam President, it's a good time to remind members that the farmers who lost income because of the boxes issue that Winera had, we have doubled the assistance for them. And contrary to what we heard, it is not $500 per farmer, because the farmers who were affected, there is a list based on those they were supplying to. The suppliers have indicated who they are, and it is not $500 per farmer. It will be based on the normal sales. There's a simple formula that is equitable that the Ministry of Agriculture applies, and farmers will be compensated based on their losses. Madam President, I believe that this initiative has serious benefits to the agricultural sector, both in terms of equipment, in terms of labor support, in terms of inputs, to give the farmers and the agricultural sector, both fisheries, food production, as well as the three of them, food production, fisheries, and what's the other one? Vegetable production, that our farmers stand to benefit. And so livestock is the third one, Madam President. So it's food production, fisheries, and livestock. These are three key areas that will be getting tremendous support from this loan. And based on the total calculations in terms of the repayment terms and the interest rates, we believe that it is a very concessionary loan. And when compared to what the benefits are, we believe that this is going to be a very, very important initiative to fulfill what was mentioned in the budget, and as well to respond as it is right now to some of the challenges that our farmers are facing in the banana industry. So I again put this to the House, to the Senate, for its support for the benefit of the agricultural sector. I thank you, Madam President.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $10 million, the loan, from the International Development Association to replenish the financing gap created by activation of the contingency emergency response component of St. Lucia's unleashing of the Blue Economy of the Caribbean project. Be it further resolved that A, the service charge is the greater of 1, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 3/4 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn credit balances. B, the maximum commitment charge is 1/2 of 1% per annum on the unwithdrawn financing balance. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years, commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years. D, the loan is repayable in semi-annual installments on the 15th day of May and 15th day of November of each year after the grace period. Senator Fede.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to make some comments on this bill, on this motion rather. I do have some questions as usual. The amount that is proposed in the motion that Parliament should approve is USD 10 million or EC 27 million. This states in the motion that this is gap financing, so it suggests that there's a bigger quantum. So the question then is, what is the total size of the Blue Economy investment in the country? Because this suggests that this is a smaller part of a bigger part. So if the government side can just produce that. But just a side note, Madam President, I just realized today that we're borrowing $171 million in this sitting. This third borrowing motion totals all of the borrowings that we have done to $171 million today. The main focus areas outlined by the government are food production, fisheries, livestock. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Madam President, a snapshot of these sectors will show you that we have got a major national crisis on our hands in these sectors. The agricultural sector is presiding one of the worst periods in its history. Madam President, the Economic and Social Review is full of commentary on the agricultural sector and its performance. And it makes for very interesting reading. So it then asks me a very important question, whether this attempt is going to be enough to salvage and rescue the damage that is already reflected in the agricultural sector, as we see in the Social Economic Review. The Social Economic Review tells us this about banana production, Madam President. It tells us that banana production, and it uses the word a historic low. Historic. That means, Madam President, never in history before have we seen such low production within the banana industry. The year 2023 is the lowest in history that the banana industry has ever recorded in the history of the country. So the damage that has been caused is a significant damage Now, I hear the members say that it is because of Hurricane Brett and, the hurricane. Yeah, of course. I mean, the blue economy is a vulnerable sector. When you're talking about coastlines, you're talking about fields and farmers' trees, yes. But I must also remind the Senator that we also had a Hurricane Elsa to deal with. And under Hurricane Elsa, we recorded growth in the agricultural sector. You look at the production of agriculture in the year 2021, you would see that there's a 4% growth. Now, I was quite fascinated to have learned that. It was only this morning, caucusing with my colleagues, that we did stumble upon that fact, that in fact, if you manage it right, if you pay the necessary attention and you give the farmers the relief that they need, then you can actually take a bad situation and turn it into a positive. Now, that was just banana production at a historic low at 3,593.4 tons. Never before, not under any government, no agriculture minister has ever had such terrible numbers, Madam President. Agriculture output in the country contracted by 17%, Madam President. A whopping 17%. Non-banana crops, Madam President. Purchases by hotels decreased by 15.2%. So, the Senator may want to say, well, the hurricane wiped out the bananas. Okay, I can buy that. And he said it also damaged the crops. I can buy that as well, no problem. So 15.2% decline in what was sold to the hotel sector. Now, I wonder what excuse the Senator will come up with for the livestock production now. I wonder whether the hurricane also washed away the pigs and washed away the fowls and washed away the eggs. Let's see what has happened, Madam President. The agriculture sector in livestock declined by 8.4%. Massive decline. Massive decline by 8.4%. Chicken and pork production combined declined by 17.3%. Madam President. Madam President, the fisheries sector. So the hurricane washed away the fish in the sea as well. Because also in the fisheries sector, we see declines. So everything, blame it on the hurricane. Now, we've had natural disasters. We've had unforeseen weather events. But I think, Madam President, that when we're going to consistently blame adverse weather effects, and we're not going to manage these situations properly, then I think the opposition will not agree with you, and the opposition will take very, 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 very strong umbrage to those positions being submitted by the government. Madam President, 4.6 decline in the fisheries sector. Madam President, 4.6 decline. However, Madam President, the revenue in the fisheries sector has recorded an uptick despite the low production numbers. Why would the volume of fish decline, but yet the prices increase? You know why, Madam President? The answer is found on the more expensive prices that farmers and fishers have had to pay for the inputs, Madam President, into the sector. And the government, we warned them, we said to you that if you're going to continue to collect very, very high excise taxes on the backs of the people, we see that subsidies in gas, Madam President, on page 56, 57. It makes very, very interesting reading in the Economic and Social Review, where it shows you this is the government's handling of the inputs as it relates to agriculture. It says excise tax, which is the tax on fuel and LPG gas and so on. It says excise tax collections on imports rose significantly by 51.3%. to a peak of $119.1 million, Madam President. $119.1 million. This strong performance was occasioned by an almost doubling of excise tax receipts on petroleum products. The fisheries sector, one of the most crucial, Madam President, one of the most crucial and consequential costs of the fisheries sector is that of fuel, is that of gasoline. The gallons of fuel that the fishers have to pay, and they have to go to the pumps, and government says, yeah, well, we give them rebates. Yeah, but an analysis must be done to show what those rebates are in dollar value and what is the net benefit to the fishers based on the excise tax that you're collecting. Are you rebating to the fishermen on every single gallon $4? If the government can answer that question today, then I will say, well, this information is not relevant to the fishermen. But without an appropriate assessment telling us whether the $390 that I'll go on to read, that excise tax on a gallon of fuel has increased by, then I cannot tell you whether the government rebates have had a positive net effect on the fishermen. And I want to say this, Madam President, again for emphasis, lest I be misconstrued. The government announced that they are going to give rebates to the fishermen. And I know that there were some rebates done. But the Economic and Social Review says in 2023, for the entire period, a gallon of fuel, the government collected $390 in excise tax, $3.90 per gallon in excise tax on the wider market. So a fisherman went to buy 10 gallons of fuel, that fisherman would have paid government $39 on every 10 gallons of fuel that he fueled his boat. It is for the government to do the analysis and tell the opposition whether the rebates that they have given to the fishermen had a net effect on the fishermen's paying at the pumps. That's a very important question that we need to answer. And so, Madam President, it goes on to say this. It says that on petroleum products to 68.7 million, owing to a higher excise tax rate and larger volumes coupled with lower subsidies on LPG cooking gas. So there's also lower subsidies on LPG cooking gas. The excise tax rates on gasoline, here we go, and diesel rose from an average of $2.56 and $1.69 respectively in 2022-2023 to $3.64 and $3.90 in 2023-2024 respectively. So you see, Madam President, in both occasions on diesel and on gasoline, we had a massive increase per gallon in excise tax. So we have seen, though, Madam President, on page 14, and I'm showing you how everything circles back. And if you look at page 14, agriculture, we'll see that the analysts suggest that there were higher prices in locally produced agriculture products. So it says agriculture output in 2023 was hindered by a confluence of supply side factors such as the rising cost of inputs, Madam President. So while the leader of government business would like us to believe that, yeah, it was the hurricane that wiped away everything, the hurricane that we had was this government's taxation policy, which really hampered the ability of the farming industry to have the very best year. And it says so in the Economic and Social Review. So the rising cost, which producers passed on to consumers, hence the very high prices that we see in agricultural produce. So which explained, Madam President, that why in the fisheries sector that the production is down by over 4%. And because of that production, what we did see, Madam President, was the revenue going up slightly. And I'm happy that the fishermen can attract a better price for their produce. But the damaging effect that this would have when the fisherman is doing cross-exchange trading and the farmer is selling to the fisherman, he's going to have to face those prices as well. On the other side, Madam President, the production of eggs also went down in the agriculture sector. It doesn't make for pretty good reading. Egg production, Madam President, fell by 7.8% to 1.7 million dozens in 2023, resulting in lower earnings to the egg farmer, and this went down, Madam President, to 14.6%. This is despite, Madam President, the selling price increases even in eggs that went up, according to the Economic and Social Review. So what we see is that if we want to support the blue economy, and we want to have a comprehensive plan to help the various people within the blue economy, and we want to ensure that there is a very seamless economic strategy, excuse me, that would help the general economy and that will help the prices of commodities generally, then, Madam President, it can't be political. Every single aspect in agriculture, everything, the same report card that the government put together, the opposition did not write this, Madam President. This is an economic and social review for the country. And it really pains me, Madam President, that if anybody gets up and refute the positions that have been taken about our banana industry, it tells me, Madam President, that the government is not serious about doing something remedial to help our farmers. These are not just a set of numbers. Madam President, there is a deep correlation between these numbers and how farmers feel on the ground. And I'm speaking for a number of people come to mind who have called me specifically on this agriculture sector issue. Because now, Madam President, the livestock farmers are very concerned about licenses that are going to be given to KFC, for example, for the importation of chicken. And the government will say, well, that's not true. But they are concerned, Madam President, that there are people or there are certain businessmen that are given license, Madam President, that are unprecedented. We know that there is a quota system of 25% of production that they must meet before you can import it. But the farmers are very concerned how certain people are accomplishing those licenses, Madam President. And it is affecting the livestock industry. And the government must really use its good offices to look into these matters on behalf of the farmers. I really wasn't going to speak on this bill because I really thought that the government was going to talk about diving and fishing. But since now you come and you open it about agriculture, then I have to let you know that it's a blue economy bill motion. So when you come and you speak, about food production and you speak about fishing and livestock, it's a crisis. It's a national crisis in this country. Madam President, I want to say that I support the general principle for any relief to the farmers. I want to use my time here to implore the government to do more by the farmers. I don't think $1 million in compensation is enough. By now, the government should have disbursed those monies to the farmers so that they can begin the real work of reproducing. These announcements that, oh, well, we're sending you a worker here and there. We know fully well that these are supporters of the St. Lucia Labour Party who you're trying to find jobs. You are not trying to help the farmer. Let's face it. This is my opinion that I'm going to express. The government is not going to do a jobs program to get farm workers because it cares about the farmers. If it had cared about the farmers, Madam President, we would not have been out of boxes. We would not need to wait on the money now. The Prime Minister would not prioritize jazz over the farmers. You're spending $8 million for jazz, but yet you're giving the farmers $1 million? You mean to tell me you cannot find $10 million and properly take care of the agriculture sector? I'm speaking now on behalf of the people of Roseau, the people of Jackmill, the people of Vanna, the banana farmers who need your help, who are fed up and frustrated with what you have done. And the numbers show it. This is a total disaster. And we need to stop this politics and get on with the business of managing the country properly so that the farmers can get proper reprieve. Madam President, through you, I call on the government to increase the compensation for the farmers in light of these very dangerous and precipitous numbers that we have seen. We've seen a really cliff-hanging decline from the agriculture industry. The report card on it is a total disaster, and the government must act appropriately. I thank you.
Senator Shalry.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon, colleagues. Madam President, I stand here to lend my support to the motion before us. A request to borrow the sum of $10 million from the International Development Association, in addition credit financing to fund the Unleashing the Blue Economy of the Caribbean project, and more specifically the smaller component of that project, which is the SIRC, Contingency Emergency Response component. Madam President, this funding is geared towards improvement in the blue economy. And so the question I will begin with is, what is the blue economy? And the blue economy is a system that seeks to conserve the marine and freshwater environments within an economy. So it really looks at the sustainable use of the ocean resources for economic growth. And when we look at ocean resources, we look at the ocean and we look at the other things that affect it, such as agricultural practices and so on. In the presentation of the motion, the leader of government business did speak to the particular components of the funding, Madam President. Madam President, it is important that I, for the record, state that the UBEC project, also the smaller component of the SIRC that we're speaking about today, is not particular to St. Lucia alone. So whereas the member opposite spent his presentation looking specifically at the statistics in St. Lucia, an attempt to mislead the people into believing that the amount is so insignificant in the bigger realm of things. However, Grenada, as well as St. Vincent and the Grenadines, are also party to that funding under that project, Madam President, and they are receiving about the same amount under the SIRC component. And again, we need to clearly establish that the SIRC is a smaller component of a larger project under UBEC. I will not go into all of the components of the project, but just to highlight a few, Madam President. The three major areas highlighted, and the aim of which is to strengthen the food system, to build resilience. And the three major components are fisheries production, livestock production, and crop production. Madam President, we know that these parts of our economy are very susceptible. They're susceptible to, and I think the information has been bandied around, they're susceptible to natural disasters such as hurricanes. They're also susceptible to pests when we look at both livestock and crop. Madam President, but the fisheries sector, so whereas the member opposite, Senator Fede, asked the question, was the fisheries sector affected by the hurricane? And it's quite a bit absurd that I seem to get, and I may have interpreted it wrong, but I seem to get the feeling that he was attempting to make the point that the fisheries sector cannot be affected by natural disasters such as hurricane, and that's really absurd, because when there is a natural disaster, whereas we have flooding on the land and high winds and so on, and banana trees would fall and so on, the fishery sector is also affected by the same hurricane, because you have poor visibility sometimes as a result of that. You have high seas as a result of hurricanes, and so they are affected as well. But more than anything else, the other effect on the fisheries sector is the whole issue of climate change, where the fishers, the same fishers on the ground, I don't know which part of where he speaks to them, but these same fishers on the ground are affected adversely by issues of climate change, where the fish are migrating further and further away from shore because of the warming of the water. And so that is one of the reasons why the solution that has been sought is to increase the deployment of FADs, which is one of the things that will be done under that project. But apart from just that, under the fisheries production aspect, there will be the enhancement, and I did speak to it when I debated the budget last sitting. Enhancement of food safety, sanitation and hygiene, strengthening safety at sea, increased sustainability of fisheries production. On the livestock, the minister spoke extensively about the increase in the national in artificial insemination and so on. So I think we understand that clearly. Madam President, in terms of greater inputs for fishing, the member who spoke before me on the opposite side spoke to increase in inputs, especially for the fishing sector, and specific mention was made of fuel. Madam President.
Sorry to break your trend of thought. It's always for the record to indicate which senator spoke before you.
Madam President. I referred to Senator Fady. He made specific mention of the inputs for fishing, and one of those he mentioned specifically was fuel. But I remember clearly, Madam President, I remember, what was it, an orange match, the color almost closest to yellow, where we were trying to find a hidden $6.80 on fuel, where the excise tax at the time, Madam President, moved from some $4+ to about $6.80, Madam President. And so the question is, I had been in the sector at the time. I do not remember ever that the government at the time, which was the government of the United Workers' Party, ever called the fishing sector to find out what the effects of the increase of the excise tax was on the fishing sector. But the cries of the fishers, they were there in the corridors, they were there on the landing sites and in the bay at the time. Who cried for them then, Madam President? Madam President, there was also the issue during COVID. During COVID, when the government was borrowing monies to build. You know who they forgot, Madam President? They forgot the fishers. And you know why I say that? Because the fishers were the one accused by the then administration for illegal backdoor entry. And you know what the solution was? The solution was pull up your boats on shore for a week. That's the solution they gave to the fishers. The same fishers they remember today and they are crying for, Madam President. And it took a resilient industry to stand up, Madam President, and speak again the ill treatment of the then administration as it relates to the fishers, to be able to get the then Prime Minister. And I sat in the room when the discussions were happening, Madam President, selected on behalf of the sector to sit and beg and negotiate with the then Prime Minister to ask them to allow the fishers to go back to sea. And you know what that was added on? That was added on them closing the St. Lucia Fish Marketing Corporation. Right. Madam President, they sit here and they speak about accountability and transparency, and they want to know how much is the bigger UBEC project. But I'm still standing there so long later and asking, what was the deal between the government of St. Lucia and Lucian Blue Ocean Seafoods? That up to a day like today, the fishermen of this country have not had a place to sell their fish because they closed down the St. Lucia Fish Marketing. No consultation with the fishers. Yes. Madam President, moi mouté des son. c'est l'autre manager de ces coopératives là, nous montons des sons, pêcher qui te journée travail yo, et nous montons des sons. Meeting at Department of Fisheries, meeting union, ka discuss avec minister then and the permanent secretary. Qui ça nous kay fait Excel Fish Marketing Corporation? And the meeting agreed, a cabinet memo was prepared at the time, Madam President, that we are going to go in a PPP. And I sat at an AGM of my cooperative on a Sunday. I sat at a meeting at my cooperative discussing with our members, because we had then proposed to the government that we're going to take over the management of the ice machine to at least be able to provide the fishers with ice for production. And whilst we were there, Madam President, the then depot manager in Vieux-Fort, who was a member of my cooperative, got a call and walked out of the meeting, only to come back in to inform us that we were basically, the discussion we were having was futile because we're trying to get our members to agree for us to take over the ice machine. He got a call, you know, to do what? To drop off the keys for the depot to the personnel at Lucia Blue Ocean Seafood. So whilst nous en yoti kwen ka négocier gouvernement pour ban nou ice machine bay se pêcher, gouvernement allait l'oclamer by Lucia Blue Ocean li without consultation to the sector. That is the representation we had. That's it, Madam President. And when I spoke to the then minister, he said that he had gotten basically the understanding or the thinking from the fishing sector that we did not want to take over. And so my question is, who did you speak to? He spoke to 2 or 3 fishers, and they made up their mind then. And the fishers of St. Lucia has been languishing from since then because we cannot finish unfold the agreement between Lucia and Blue Ocean Seafoods and the government of St. Lucia. They've never made that contract public. So let you have in parley about accountability and transparency. Mother you contract sala, Madam President. The fishers still want to see it. It took the industry on their own to call in ek nou bien discoyer nou te nou kouye Lucia and Blue Ocean pako nou ek nou di no anou parley. And even if the waters were already muddied and salty, we called Lucia Blue Ocean Seafoods to a discussion and asked, what are you bringing to the table? How can we help? This, that, and the other. We did it on our own because the government of lab left us in a corner, Madam President. Madam President, it also took this Philip J.P. administration to recognize the issue of the fuel for the fishers. And I remember the fishers when the UWP administration increased the excise tax, they were saying, but pêcher pas service chimé pour yo island because yo te increase li pour wager chimé. Ek se pêcher a dit nous pas service chimé pour island so ki manen nou ni pour payer tout. They never heard the cry of the fisher. It took this Philip J. Pierre administration to say, we understand you all suffered for so many years, let us give you a little thing back. That's what it took. And Madam President, Senator Fede, his question was, what is the net benefit of the rebate? The rebate, pour qui ça y a kahele à Madam President? 2 mois rebate tout celle qui a payé ou savent. The additional $54,000 that was paid, 2 mois tout celle ou savent. À ou septembre 2023, 2 mois tout seul. 2 mois tout seul qui a payé. Et qui a kahele. The net benefit will be realized because when this announcement was made in terms of the increase to the rebate, there was no start and there was a start date, there was no end date to it. So the fishers will realize the net benefit, Madam President. Madam President, I need to, for the purpose of the record.
Madam President, I stand on a point of order.
Senator Fede?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam President.
What's your
The
point
member
of order,
is
please?
misleading the House in suggesting that the fishers are going to have a positive net effect on the rebate because she has not told us what is the dollar value on the rebate per gallon of fuel. How much, is it $1 or $2 on a gallon of fuel versus the $3.90 which was averaged last year? That's the question.
Proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I need to clarify for the purpose of those following that I seem to, and note well I said I seem to, I may be wrong here, to get the feeling that there was a mix-up, and I suspect it was deliberate, in terms of the $500,000 that was announced by the Prime Minister for the farmers. At one point, I heard a connection to the hurricane. But to me, if I heard correctly, and if as well that I understand English correctly, and I know that the Prime Minister reiterated it, I don't know if he reiterated it in Pato as well, that the support is directly related to the loss that the farmers suffered with regards to the box situation.
Senator, I think you need to provide a little clarification. I think it was Senator Fady who spoke and related that matter. So are you responding to his utterance, or are you speaking to something else?
Madam President, I'm not necessarily responding to him. I'm simply indicating what the $500,000 is for. So the $500,000 promised and announced by the Prime Minister is to support the farmers who suffered losses as a direct result of the situation with the unavailability of boxes. I simply want to make that abundantly clear. L'argent Premier Ministre la promet pour bay farmer, c'est pour ces farmer qui pate ça vendre produit yo, because yo pate ni boîte pour faire ça, because compagnie qui te ka produit boîte là à l'air pate ça produit boîte pour assurer yo te ça vendre produit yo. I just want to make that clear for the record. Madam President, on a bit of a light side, I sat here and I learned, they say you're never too old to learn, and learning is a continuum. But I sat here this afternoon and I learned an interesting fact from Senator Dominic Fady, that the Minister of Agriculture produces boxes. I mean, I know he was a farming extension officer, and I know he's now a politician. But I've now learned that we're adding one more accolade, that he's a box producer, and that was quite interesting. Madam President, the member Dominic Fady spoke about the FADs, which is one of the components.
Senator, I think you should use the correct title. It is Senator Fady.
Sorry, I thought I said that. I apologize, Madam President. That was the intent. So I'm correcting it. Senator Fady indicated that between Ancillary and Soufriere, they need about 20 FADs. And of course, the question was thrown across: how many were deployed during his time, because he represented the constituency of Ancillary Canneries. And I know for a fact, Madam President, that the fishermen of Ancillary Canneries, they've always required FADs. And I do not recall that any significant number of FADs were deployed whilst he was the member for that constituency. Yeah. But it's a good thing that he's making a plea on their behalf, because in fact the current member, I think maybe last week or week before, whilst we were in the chamber, did indicate to me that he had gotten one already in the constituency. I think in Ancillary, one had been deployed, and he told me to ensure that Canneries also gets their FAD. And I did promise him that whilst we do the advocation, that we will ensure that that is done, because we really look at equitable distribution, Madam President, albeit on the advice of the Department of Fisheries, because the Department of Fisheries is the entity responsible to make the determination in terms of whether FADs are deployed. They are to approve the coordinates for the FADs and so on. But that will be done. Ancillary canneries have not been forgotten in the consultation for the CERC. I know that the consultant has had sit down with the members of the fishing sector there, and they will not be left out from the pie, Madam President. Madam President, there was also a plea from Senator Fady, and he also indicated, as based on the Economic and Social Review, in regarding the decline in the pig industry, and he said that our farmers need real help. Of course our farmers need real help, because the pig farmers, instead I state, let me ask a question. Perhaps what Senator Fede should have done, Madam President, is to explain to the pig farmers of St. Lucia what became of the abattoir. That would have made for an interesting conversation. Ek de lè mwen ka pase chimè bosse jou kaya gwas, Madame Président. Ek chaque lè mwen pase la, ek ouè un abattoir, a government, a foreign government, bay set lisi l'argent pour bâti un abattoir, bay fama, cochon, ek bef set lisi. Mais gouvernement sénateur Fede te ka sauve bay la. Yo pate changer ces femmes cochon et ces femmes bœuf là. À présent yo ka hele. C'est yo même qui dit si c'est ça moun ka hele pour yo just commencer hele. Mais à présent yo ka hele bay même ces femmes qui ça yo fait abattoir, Madame Président. Yo bay li golo. Yo bay li golo, Madame Président. And everything now they speak about the monies will be the farming program will benefit. It's jobs for the labor boys and jobs for the labor girls. Mais abattoir c'est pour tout le monde qui ça yo fait puis. What did they do with it? And it's sitting there. It's standing there. And the farmers, the pig farmers, the cow farmers of St. Lucia have not been able to use the abattoir, Madam President. Who did they prioritize then? Who did they prioritize then? Madam President, I can assure you that this component under the UBEC project, the benefits of it to the country, the benefits of it to the agricultural and fishing sector will be felt throughout the length and breadth of St. Lucia. Madam President, increase in food security will redound to the benefit of women, of boys, of girls, and of men in this country. Madam President, a lot of the components of these sectors are undocumented. Ou pas sans fini calculate, Madame Président, Kimizi, Madame, Misia ka pêche, Misia ka planté, et c'est Madame là ka vendre, yo ka l'autre poisson, yo ka vendre produit à bolawi. En chacun de yo pas certifié, et de les nous garder ces statistics là, en chacun de yo pas, we're not accounting for them, Madam President. But it means that any improvement to any of these sectors, whether it be fisheries, livestock or crop production, will inevitably redound to their benefit, Madam President. And I'm pretty sure that the women will benefit from greater sanitation, better infrastructure on the landing sites. Those who will benefit from the assistance of the farm laborers on the farms, Madam President, they will feel the real benefits of this project, Madam President. And so, as I reiterate my support, Madam President, I want to put on the record, Madam President, that our farmers and our fishers should really make a great attempt to shut out the noise that's passing in this country for an opposition, Madam President. Because the reality of what they face, until you walk with them and until you honestly and truthfully speak with them, you will not understand it. And whereas we're saying that this is not sufficient and this is not enough, but we're so used to hearing that from this chamber, Madam President. Nothing is enough. Nothing is good enough. Everything can be more. But you can always go back to the question of what did you do when you were given the opportunity by the same farmers and fishers to make a difference in their life? What did you do? And so I encourage them, as the consultations continue to happen, to one, continue to discuss what the issues are so that we can arrive at workable, practical solutions for the issues that affect them, Madam President. And I look forward to the social, economical, and environmental benefits that will be derived, Madam President, under the sub-component of the UBEC project. And so I pledge my support, Madam President, for this motion. I thank you.
Senator Antoine Prosper.
Thank you, Madam President. I really had no intention of speaking on this motion because I thought it was straightforward, and it is a motion in the benefit of the farmers and fishers of St. Lucia. And I'm very appalled that people on the opposite side would have issues with the motion and not support the motion. Madam President, I just want to respond on some utterances from Senator Fede. And maybe my colleague has spoken about some of them. Madam President, the farmers in St. Lucia have suffered under the last administration. They were promised that the bananas would be sold to France, and they never got that opportunity. Madam President, the farmers were given seeds, and I do not know how they would produce with only seeds and not the necessary assistance they needed for their farming. Madam President, this government is offering relief to farmers. We are concerned about food security. We are concerned about sustainable agriculture. We are concerned about food production. And this is why the government is offering this assistance to fishers and to farmers. Senator Fede asked, what happened to the livestock? We have to face the realities. And sometimes I wonder whether members of the opposition live in a global environment, whether they know what is happening around them and they make those utterances. We come here every day and speak about the effects of global warming. We speak of the rise in sea level. We speak of warmer water and fish moving away from the shore. Overfishing that has led to the decline in many fish species. So we really do not have as much fish as we had before. We speak of the degradation of the coral reefs, and we know that species of fish survive in the coral reefs. Since 1977, we have seen a decline of about 80% of our coral reefs. You go to Soufrière, you go all around, and we can see probably bad fishing practices have resulted in the degradation of the coral reefs. The rise in sea levels also, in the temperature of the sea also causes a decline in the coral reefs. And so we know what are some of the causes of the fishermen not catching as much fish, and why we should help them with fads, etc., so that we can help them to increase on the catch, so that they can make a better livelihood. We know about the change in the ocean currents, and I am sure the senator is very much aware of that when he speaks of the decline in the catch. Madam President, I also heard the senator speaking about the Minister blaming the Minister of Agriculture for boxes. I never knew that the Minister of Agriculture owned Winera, or he probably has shares in Winera. I never knew that. And trust me, Prime Minister Philip J.P. would not have allowed that to happen. the supplier of boxes could not supply boxes and the farmers suffered. The Prime Minister, having realized that the farmers suffered, is offering some relief. Isn't this something that we have to welcome? This is something we must welcome. And we cannot stand on the other side and make it seem that it is something bad the Prime Minister is doing. When the opposition, I want the opposition to put up their scorecard and tell us what they did to help the fishers and the farmers of St. Lucia. Put up your scorecard. You couldn't do that this afternoon. You couldn't say what you have done for the farmers and the fishers in St. Lucia, and yet you want to stand there and criticize what the government is doing. Trust me, Prime Minister Honorable Philip J. Pierre would have done a lot more if he had the available resources. You ask what happened to the livestock.
Speak to the chair, please, Senator. Speak to the chair.
Madam President, sorry about that. Senator Fede asked what happened to the livestock. He's not saying that they put horses before the livestock. They destroyed Boseju Agricultural Station. There were goats, there were sheep, there was fresh milk, there were cows, right now we have to import a new bloodline. We have to import new species for the farmers to breed their animals, because they destroyed the abattoir, they destroyed the agricultural station, and they put horses in air condition. Where are the horses now? You have to tell us, why did you exchange our livestock for horses before you stand on the other side and speak about where's the livestock? And this is what we want to hear from you. The Prime Minister has given $2.50 rebate on the fuel for the fishers, up from the $1.50. Talk about that. This is something positive. This is something positive. You talk about that. You talk about the ice machines, because we have fishermen who ply the route to sell their fish on a pickup, and sometimes they cannot get ice to preserve the fish. And now we are giving ice machines to all the fishing villages so that the fishermen can keep their fish on ice, keep their fish fresh, so that the fish they sell is good fish to the public. We have to be concerned about our health. And this is why we are ensuring that we put ice machines. We are giving the farmers water tanks. As the leader of government business has said, we experienced the dry season. I am sure the farmers from Saltibus, from Jetwin, around the country are complaining about the water supply. We know we depend on the little rivers and streams for our water supply in St. Lucia. And so they have to have storage to maintain their farms. I know about that because I have 2 greenhouses at my home. And when it is dry, the plants wilt, and a number of farmers have lost an entire crop. I didn't get it from Ezekiel, no. They have lost an entire crop just this year because of low water supply. So if we can assist the farmers, this is something we have to be against. We have to be very happy that the Ministry of Education, of Agriculture has come forward to assist the farmers. And this is something we should applaud. Thank you very much.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. My colleagues have given proper treatment to a lot of the issues that were raised in connection with this motion, so I shall be very brief. First of all, Madam President, the motion was presented, but there was context. And there was context to everything that the motion was dealing with. Yes, we recognize it's the Blue Economy, the UBEC program, and it's not only about fads and ice machines, but I think I was very clear in my explanation that there was the SUP was one of the major initiatives that this was being used to finance. And I don't know if the opposition neglected the fact that I mentioned the SUP, but I will just emphasize again that when the opposition has been instructed by their leader to stick to a certain script, they must also make sure that it is applicable to the debate. So, for example, the issue of the issue of the boxes, for example, was something that they definitely tried to hit on, and even to the extent where I was wondering whether they were confusing the $1 million or so assistance for the boxes with a previous storm, and I think Senator Toussaint had to deal with that. Madam President, it appears that the strategy is to stick to the economic and social review and try to find as many blue boxes as you can to derail every debate that is brought up in this chamber. Because every time the opposition stands, the economic and social review is the Bible, and of course, when you quote the wrong scripture, the Bible can actually be a problem for you. So I hope that we've heard wrong quotes today, we've heard blue tables from the previous debate, we've heard information out of context, we've heard all kinds of things. But what we've not heard is the opposition acknowledging that the government has made policy statements in its budget, and the government is here to secure financing to execute the programs that have been outlined in the budget. That is what it is. Madam President, the opposition, in the person of Senator Fede, mentioned the issue of low production in the sector, pretending that he does not know that over 75% of our crop, banana and plantain crop, was wiped away by Hurricane Tropical Storm Brett. And not only did you lose the crop, but plantain and bananas, there's a certain period of time that they take between the time you plant and the time you harvest. And by all means, if you do the math, you will see why at a particular time there was a low production. That is very simple. But it would appear that the senator has no idea. He talked about Roseau Valley farmers. If he claims to be a champion of farmers, he should at least understand what the produce of the farmer is like and how long it takes for them to produce. I'm not sure he can relate to that. I think he's better off relating to some other things that I don't wish to mention because I don't want to lengthen the debate. Madam President, I mentioned in my presentation the benefit of the fads to the farmers, not to the farmers, to the fishers, in that it will help to reduce the distance that they have to travel to fish. I thought that was just a logical explanation to say they'll spend less money on fuel. But the opposition took that and tried to run with the fuel thing. And I cannot believe I heard the Senator Fede raising the issue of excise tax. Excise tax? Madam President, we had excise tax at $2.50 on a gallon of gas. He sat in the cabinet with his prime minister and was part of the team or the group that increased it by 60% to $4 on every gallon of gas. Now you have a problem with excise tax? We have not increased the excise tax, Madam President. And if you do the calculations, the pass-through mechanism we use every month when the fuel price adjustment is made, if you look at the difference, we have never or hardly ever seen an increase of $2.50 on a gallon of gas. So they brought in a tax that is costing the customer $2.50 more on every gallon of gas, every single time, and it has not changed. But you know he wants to talk about excise tax. And Madam President, the issue of...
Madam President, I'd like to stand in a point of order.
Senator Fede, we are doing this wrong again. You put on your light. I acknowledge you, then you stand. Okay, so let's go. Your light on.
Thank you for the guidance, Madam President. The member is grossly misleading the House, and his submission that they have never raised the excise tax, they've never been able to collect $2.50 a gallon is wrong, because the Economic and Social Review states clearly, page 56, read it again. It said that in the year 2023, it averaged at $3.90, which is nearing the $4 where it was.
Please proceed.
Madam President, this is almost comical. I do not think that Senator Fady will pretend that he doesn't know the difference between the excise tax, which is $4, and the increase that was made from $2.50 to $4. I am hoping that he's not pretending. He doesn't understand the difference between what the excise tax is and what the increase was. So let me just leave that alone, because this is just going to prolong an argument that takes us to nowhere. Madam President, the member is calling for an increase in the number of fads. You know, we need 20 fads in what's the area he referenced? In ancillary, between ancillary and so forth. Oh, we need 20 fads. Come on, Bayou. How many fads has he? He was the MP for ancillary candies for 5+ years. We know ancillary is a well-established fishing village. We have ancillary fish fries and all of that, right? You never saw a need to put one fad. Now you want 20.
Senator Fady?
Yeah.
Senator Fady?
Yes, Madam President. Again, the member is misleading the House in saying that I've never ever put one fad in ancillary canneries. Now, the first senator who said it was Senator from Viewford, Senator Kadriana Touset, I think. Yes. And now the member is repeating it. This is very inaccurate. I want to state on the record that not only did my government put fads in ancillary canneries, but I personally, with my own personal funds, if you must know, I personally contributed towards fads in ancillary canneries. So please remove that from the record, withdraw that. That is inaccurate. I'm sorry to interrupt you in the rebuttal, but since you're going to say publicly things that are not accurate about me, I find it necessary to raise and place the facts on record, Madam President.
We'll verify that first.
Okay. So stated. Thank you.
May I continue?
Is your light on, Senator Touset? Yes.
Madam President, on a point of order.
What is your point of order?
Madam President, I would really appreciate if the member opposite does not impute improper motive. I did not say that the member did not deploy any fads. In fact, I asked a question as to whether he did. I never stated, so I would like the member to withdraw the statement, because this is imputing improper motive on my character. Thank you very much.
Senator Fady?
I thank you, and I thank the Senator, Madam President. I will withdraw the statement because the Senator is correct. She did ask a question, although she implied that I didn't. But the implication was very
Senator Fady, you are withdrawing the statement, period.
I am withdrawing the statement.
That's it.
Right?
Yes.
But the member, my submission, if I'm going to withdraw the statement, then it's only fair that the member here, the leader of government business, withdraw the unfactual statement that he posited on the record about me and about my representation. I beg you, please, Madam President, for your kind intervention, that he needs to withdraw the statement.
Senator, leader of government business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Senator Fady stands here.
You're responding to Senator Fady's intervention.
He stands here today as a result of my statement to say that he put fads in ancillary. That is his word against mine. Madam President, I have no evidence of what he's saying. I do not know whether he did or did not. And so I am willing to even adjust my statement and then ask the question, well, did you? If you say you did, then that's up to you. But there is no factual evidence or verifiable evidence that the Senator has put a fad anywhere. So to just come and stand up here and say I did so, I cannot verify that. So what is he asking me to withdraw?
Proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam President. So, Madam President, let's leave the facts alone. Because it appears...
Senator Fede, Senator, Leader of Government Business. No, I'm not acknowledging you. Right. So in indicating that we should leave, Senator, take your seat. Turn off your light. There will be no more back and forth on this FADS matter. You have indicated, Senator Fede, that you personally use your funds and your government did FADS for the area. You have withdrawn, Senator Toussaint withdrawn her statement. Senator, Leader of Government Business, said that he has no evidence that you did, although yours is on record. So since yours is on record, he said he'll pose a question. She has withdrawn. We move on very quickly. Proceed, Leader of Government Business.
Madam President.
Thank you, Madam President. I will proceed. And let's leave that fat story alone because what it's
President,
doing is...
I stand
Madam President, on my feet.
Senator,
You have given me permission to proceed.
could you sit down, please?
Madam President, there are two lights
Leader
on.
of Government Business, yes, my light is on, so yours must be off. Thank you. And yours, Senator Fede. I'm asking you before you even stand, are we going to speak about FADS?
My reputation is on the line because he
I have,
information that's not correct.
are you speaking together with the chair? I have decided and have asked the Leader of Government Business to move on. You asking me for evidence? Senator Fede, Senator Fede, Senator Fede, I have explained quite clearly, and I shall do so again for your benefit and for the record. You have withdrawn the statement that Senator Toussaint asked you to withdraw. You have asked the Leader of Government Business to withdraw. His response has been that he had no evidence, however, he will ask the question. But you have responded to say that you gave FADS to the area. So I said, in light of all that being on record, we shall move on. Decision is made. We move on. We shall not be stopping to speak anymore about FADS. Leader of Government Business, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. And so we move on. Madam President, when the opposition cannot find something in the motion to criticize, the opposition manufactures its own arguments. And so I found it rather surprising that the Senator Fede was suggesting that the Minister for Agriculture could not produce boxes for the farmers. But I think Senator Toussaint may have addressed that in some way, because I am not aware that any minister in this country produces boxes. And I want to reiterate, while, and I'll say that in Creole too, because the Prime Minister made an announcement that we have recognized the difficulties that the farmers face and we are going to compensate them and give them some relief, and he announced the figure. Madame President, Samakadia, la tenir situation côté fama a été affecté parce que winera pas de ça produit boîte pour yo ça mette fig. Gouvernement pas ka produit boîte by fama, mais nous ouais ça affecté yo. Gouvernement a décidé pour by fama anti-assistance parce que yo perdu valeur travail yo et puis nous a mis presque $1 million pour ça. Pendant nous faire ça, Madame Président, moi je voulais faire Sénateur Fede chargé, laissez femmes tenir problème. En tant qu'il passé, ministre Li, partez offert ces femmes à l'argent, il dit il passe à manager $1,500. Et tout celle ça a été ça bail c'est Gwen. Mais nous avons l'argent pour ça aider yo. C'est pas Gwen tout seul nous avons. So Madam President, finally, a former Minister for Tourism, and I don't know why I have to keep saying that. I don't know why I have to keep reminding Senator Fede. Maybe he says those things just so I can remind him that he's a former minister. Maybe he feels good when I say that. But Madam President, as a former minister, the senator stood here and made a statement that we are putting jazz over agriculture. We are putting jazz over agriculture. Madam President, it is not a matter of one versus the other. Jazz is part of the tourism product, and it is complementing agriculture. At any given jazz event, whether it's a fringe event, whether it is main stage, whether it is free jazz in Moshi, or Deriso jazz, or jazz on the square, anywhere, there are farmers who are benefiting, tremendous benefits, because they can have at least something that can be marketed and sold at the jazz festival. As a matter of fact, one of the features of the Deriso Jazz was jazz and arts. We were putting on show what the community produces. And last year, for example, one of the main participants in the Jazz and Arts Festival edition in Deriso was a gentleman who runs a business called Tadi Seafood. And if anybody here has not tasted Tadi Seafood, they must come up to Asia and try it. He had a booth where he was promoting his seafood products. This is a gentleman who makes a living from what we consider value added with seafood. Fishermen sell to him. And there are lots of other persons who had an opportunity to showcase their products, authentic products from the community. That was showcased at the Jazz and Arts Festival. So when a senator can come and make that kind of statement, as if to suggest that the jazz is competing or is in some way doing some harm to the agriculture, we are choosing jazz over agriculture. Madam President, is something I said to my children. I have more than one child, and I love no one of them more than the other. There is never competition. What I do for one, I do for the other. And the idea is to make sure that everybody is benefiting, that one industry supports the other. So for every jazz event, for every calypso event, for every event in the tourism industry, the farmer, the agricultural industry has an opportunity to benefit. And if he did not know that, Madam President, I can now understand better why he's sitting on that side of us. Yeah. So, Madam President, lest I use much more time of this chamber, I want to resubmit the government's full commitment towards securing those funds to assist the agricultural sector, more specifically the fishing sector or the fisheries sector, the crop production sector, and the third one, I keep forgetting the third one, the livestock sector, for the benefit of our farmers. Madam President, I thank you.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $10 million, the loan, from the International Development Association to replenish the financing gap created by activation of the contingency emergency response component of St. Lucia's Unleashing the Blue Economy of the Caribbean project. Be it further resolved that A, the service charge is the greater of 1, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 3/4 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn credit balances. B, the maximum commitment charge is 1/2 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn financing balance. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years. D, the loan is repayable in semi-annual installments on the 15th day of May and 15th day of November of each year after a grace period. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bills. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Bank of Alba.
Bank of Alba.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move that this bill be brought for second reading at the next or subsequent sitting of the Senate.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Visiting Police Forces ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies.
Visiting Police Forces ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 49-2 to allow this bill to go through its remaining stages at the sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order number 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many of our contrary opinions say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed, Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to present for second reading a bill shortly entitled Visiting Police Forces ICC World Cup Cricket West Indies. Madam President, as we have mentioned in previous discussions, the West Indies ICC, the ICC World Cup is going to be hosted this year, and St. Lucia is one of the venues. As a result of this, Madam President, there are certain measures that need to be taken for different reasons. As you would have heard, we have done some work on infrastructure. We have made some certain adjustments, and one of the necessities is that we take certain actions so that we can put security measures in place. This is an international event, and all the venues around the Caribbean who are going to be hosting the ICC Cricket World Cup have to put in similar measures in each of their jurisdiction. Some of these measures, Madam President, will require that there are some adjustments made to their security procedures. These will require some of the what we call visiting police forces or visiting police from other jurisdictions, the reinforcing of our security systems. That would be the purpose for that. We have heard that some of them will be coming from countries in the Caribbean, our neighboring islands, some from France, from Canada, and so on, to ensure that there is a beef up and an increase in our security capability as a country. You may be well aware, Madam President, when you have those world events, very prominent people visit your country, the opposition will want people to believe that nobody ain't coming here. You know? Nobody comes here because we don't have England. But I would like to remind St. Lucians, just because England is not here, nobody's coming. And that is an example. That is to tell you that important people are coming here. And there are very strict security standards that must be adhered by all the hosting territories. That requires us, Madam President, to be able to deal with this both in terms of our legislation and in terms of our processes and procedures. Madam President, I will briefly refer to some of the areas that pertain to this bill. Of course, it is for a period of time. That bill would expire on the 30th of June 2024, and so it also would be there for that period, for that particular purpose. Madam President, just let while we are on this, if I can beg your leave to just make an intervention. Given the time, I wish now to invoke Section 9(3) to allow the sitting to sit between the hours of 6 and 7:30.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order 9.3 be suspended to enable the Senate to sit beyond the prescribed time of 6 p.m., 6 o'clock in the afternoon. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed, Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. I will continue now that we have fulfilled the requirements. So I was saying that there are certain adjustments that we have to make. And so the bill, as it is, regulates the performance of official duties in the St. Lucia, in St. Lucia by members of the police force, and that would include the visiting personnel. Madam President, it indicates that the police force from the following states that I mentioned, Canada, South Africa, the United Kingdom, France, Netherlands, Antilles, from all over. Since that is happening, there are certain procedures. And just let me mention a few. As it relates to these visiting police forces, Madam President, the bill makes provision for the Commissioner of Police to provide operational direction to the visiting police force, and also specifies the status of members of the visiting police force, which is akin to the police officer in St. Lucia, and therefore a member of the visiting police force is immune from prosecution for actions taken in the course and in the official duties. And now one may find that extremely sensitive, and that is correct. But Madam President, when you have responsibility for hosting world events, there are certain conditions that in your own jurisdiction you may have to arrange to accommodate what is not often what is not often common, or what is not often normal in your circumstances. Madam President, the bill also contains provisions for criminal jurisdiction or court relation to an offense committed by a member of the visiting police force for trial by a court having the primary right. There are some other provisions, Madam President. The bill, for example, provides for claims to be made against the visiting police officer or police force in accordance with the bill, which may be settled through arbitration. That reminds me of a condition that exists in FIFA in football, where instead of matters of legal challenge going to court, if you're a member, an affiliate of FIFA, you have taken the responsibility and accepted that matters where there is a difference in or a dispute is taken before a tribunal, and that it has the members, the affiliates, agree that when there are disputes, it is not settled in the traditional conventional criminal court, but it is settled via tribunal. So this reminds me of a similar type of arrangement when you are part of international sporting international sporting agencies. Madam President, the bill also provides the minister with the power to make orders and that specify the powers that a visiting police officer may exercise while they are in St. Lucia. I would want to also mention it is the government's wish to provide all St. Lucians and spectators with the necessary security, we recognize that, while attending the events, and therefore favorable consideration is being sought for the House to pass this piece of legislation. Like I said, Madam President, it is a temporary measure. It is specific to the World Cup event, and it's going to expire on the 30th of June. Of course, it is a little bit before the actual end of the tournament, but logistics will require that certain you close certain doors and sort out some of the issues that will follow the actual end of the competition. For example, we may have the last game on, let's say, June 15th, but players are still here, management is still here, there are certain things that need to be done before they leave your country. And all of that time, while there is no cricket, but the personnel is still here, and so the security must still be here. So, Madam President, this bill, in a summary, is really a procedure that legal, or let us say legislative procedure, that every territory, the 6 territories hosting the Cricket World Cup, must put in place to satisfy the security requirements of the World Cup. So I put this to this chamber for its approval in light of the event that we are about to host. I thank you, Madam President.
Senators, the question is that the Visiting Police Forces ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies bill be read a second time. I now put the question.
Did I get ahead of myself?
No. Okay, proceed.
Madam President, I do have some very, very strong concerns about the bill that is being presented to us here today. Madam President, I do understand that the government is overwhelmed by the crime situation in the country. If not so, the government would not have been seeking outside help to help them with the increased crowds that they're expecting for Cricket World Cup. And they now have to turn to...
Madam President.
Senator Jawahir,
Thank you, Madam President. I rise on a point of order.
your point of order.
Madam President, the member is deliberately misleading the House. It has been presented by the Leader of Government Business that this is a requirement for every country hosting. The same would apply for if you have FIFA World Cup, any country hosting has to have those measures in place. So it has absolutely nothing to do with any government or any country being overwhelmed. This is just a stipulation by ICC. So I think he needs to correct himself and understand that he should refrain from misleading the House.
Point of elucidation. Thank you, Senator Jawahir. Senator Fede, I think your statement have been corrected, so you can choose to correct it or move on. But definitely this is what the Leader of Government Business offered to this chamber.
Madam President, it then begs the question as to why the ICC finds it necessary to not rely on local police forces of individual countries. And we're talking about 6 Caribbean countries that are here. So it's a very strange action that if respective countries have got their own security apparatus, then why does the ICC find it necessary to institute outside help? That is something that only you can answer, because you are the ones that are presiding over this World Cup. Now, I do have some other concerns as it relates to the specific clauses of this legislation. Madam President, in section, please bear with me, section 7 of the bill presented here today, it says, a member of a visiting police force who is sent to St. Lucia to perform police duties, they can perform similar duties by him or her in his or her state during Cricket World Cup 2024 shall, while on duty in St. Lucia, perform the same duties under and in accordance with the directions of the Commissioner in the same manner and in all respects as if he or she were a member of the local police force. So, in other words, Madam President, this says that it gives the visiting police officers the status to do anything under the Royal St. Lucia Police Force Act as if they were local police. Goes on in section 2, it says, subsection 2, I read 7, section 7, 1A. Now I'm reading subsection 2 of the same provision. Section to this act, the members of a visiting police force shall have the same rights, powers, privileges, and immunities as are conferred by law on members of the police force as may be necessary for the performance of duties. No problem so far. This is where it gets tricky. Section 8. Notwithstanding subsection 2, subsection 7.2. So even though the local police have certain immunities, this act finds it necessary to give special immunities to the visiting police officers. So here is what it says, Madam President. It says that the members of a visiting police force shall be immune from prosecution in criminal court proceedings in St. Lucia in respect of actions taken in the course of official duties. Madam President, I do have very, very grave concern about this clause in that here you are giving the visiting police officers the right to perform duties. Now, let's not lose sight of what those duties are. You're talking about the right to arrest, the right to make arrests, to take reports on people's personal information, to take certain preemptive actions where they find it necessary in the event of public order. We see, Madam President, that in Section 10, they're also given the right to carry explosives and ammunitions and firearms. But yet, Madam President, we are absolving them of any accountability for the usage of firearms and ammunitions and all the stuff that our local police officers can be charged with. Madam President, I will refer to a specific case without prejudicing it. And it's before the courts right now. And it was Grosse Lake Carnival. And a certain police officer was in responding to a public response. There was a shooting in the crowds, Madam President.
Madam President, I rise on the point of order. I'm sorry.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Bad habits, bad habits. Madam President, I rise on the point of order. I heard a member just mentioning that he is about to make reference to a matter that is sub judice, and he knows fully well that it should not be done in this chamber. And I don't know how he can say he will do so without prejudicing. He should not make reference to matters that are in court. He's just starting to do so.
Although, just to be on the safe side, Senator Fady, I do not know what you're about to say, but I think in any case, I think you should stay clear of this case. So just to be on the safe side. No. After you have uttered, then we will know whether you prejudice or not. But I'm saying, just to be on the safe side, my advice is that you stay clear of this and move on to other parts.
And so then, Madam President, I'll be guided and cautioned by you. But police officers in the line of duty have been prosecuted, both in the past, and there are a few cases before the courts right now, that they must meet certain legal requirements and they must meet certain rules, guidelines, stipulations. The people that they're securing, Madam President, those people have rights as afforded in our Constitution and as afforded in our law as well, in the Police Act. So therefore, Madam President, if a police officer is found in violation of any of the rules that relates directly to the execution of his or her duties, then that police officer is not free or immune from prosecution. What this is doing, it brings in foreign police officers to help the World Cup situation, but then it's creating a different rule for those foreign police officers to be immune from the very same laws, guidelines, and principles that our local police officers should follow. So why are we creating two standards, two different rules for police officers during the World Cup? I don't agree with that, Madam President. I do not agree with that provision made in the legislation. If you're going to be empowered to carry arms, if you're going to be empowered to carry ammunition, these equipment, they are very, very sensitive. They can take lives of individuals if they are not used in the correct manner. And so therefore, Madam President, I believe that every law enforcement official ought to be accountable to the rules and the guidelines as specified in our local laws, Madam President. And so I do not agree with the immunity that Section 8 does allow for in this, this legislation. And so while the opposition may think that we're just here doing a routine passage of legislation, I find this to be very, very grave. And this to me is disrespectful to the hardworking police officers, men and women in St. Lucia, who have been here carrying the baton, who have been here fighting in all kinds of very, very less than desired circumstances. And you're not going to hold the foreign police officers to the same standard as you do the local police officers, and you make that a law? Madam President, I describe that as ludicrous. I describe that as unfair. And I describe that as creating two set of rules within the police force. And I do not support those provisions in the bill. So Section 8, Clause 2, it says the immunity specified under subsection 1 may be waived in respect of a member of a visiting police force by the competent authority of the designated state of the visiting police officer. So while, of the visiting police force rather. So while Section 8, subsection 2 seeks to provide a bit of comfort, it still leaves it, Madam President, and still leaves the rules very wide open for visiting police officers who under Section 10 will be allowed to carry arms and explosives to violate laws without being accountable. That's very dangerous. Very, very, very dangerous. Very dangerous. Very dangerous. So, Madam President, Section 9. A certificate of the Commissioner that anything alleged to have been done by a member of the visiting police force of a designated state was not done in the performance of official duty is receivable in evidence in any court, and for the purpose of this act is proof of fact. So what then would normally be the case is that each case in St. Lucia, if there is in fact a violation of any one of the rules in a police officer in the execution of his duties, then the files, Madam President, would have a set of evidence accompanied. But in this instance, we're now saying that the police commissioner can give a certificate, and that will be okay for these visiting police officers. Madam President, this will be accepted as fact. Again, Madam President, very dangerous. Very dangerous. I do not support that provision of this bill. Madam President, I do not support Section 10 either. If the police officers that are coming to work alongside our hardworking men, if they don't have the same rules as our hardworking men and women in the police force who have taken us through COVID, who have taken us through hurricanes, who have taken us through natural disasters, who are on the front line, Madam President, facing a very dangerous crime crisis in the country, Madam President. And you want to tell me that the guys who are coming from overseas are going to have different rules from them, but are going to be treated as if they are full members of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, and all of the rights that our local police officers have do apply to them, but yet they are immune and the rules are different, and they can get away with any violations in the line of duty? That can't be fair to our local police officers. That cannot be fair at all. So, Madam President, I do not support that. So members of a visiting police force acting in the course of duties may, if authorized to do so by the Commissioner, possess and carry explosive ammunitions and firearms. If you don't want to be accountable for the usage of such dangerous equipment, then don't carry them. It's simple my position. The foreign police officers should have the same rules. Now it gets interesting. Let's go to the jurisdiction. It's subject to subsection, I'm looking at part 2 of the legislation where it talks about jurisdiction, and then the criminal jurisdiction. 11.1 subsection 2, sorry, 11, section 11 subsection 1, subject to subsection 2, and section 8. Section 8 talks about immunity. The court has the primary right to exercise jurisdiction in respect of an act that constitutes, thank you, Madam President, that constitutes an offense against a law enforced in St. Lucia that is committed by a member of the visiting police force. Section 2, subsection 2 of that section reads, the competent court of a designated state has the primary right to exercise jurisdiction with respect to the alleged commission of an offense by a member of a visiting police force in relation to the property or security of the designated state, or B, the person or property of another member of the visiting police force. And so, Madam President, we see here that while there are attempts to give some comfort, it does not extinguish and properly vanquish the concerns outlined in Section 8, Madam President, where it speaks to the immunity that is allowed to foreign police officers, creating 2 police forces in St. Lucia. Madam President, I do not support this bill.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Madam President. I do share some of the concerns raised by Senator Fede, though not necessarily for exactly the same reasons. I do agree, and I'm not quite sure exactly why additional immunities needed to be granted to the visiting police forces. As I understand it, for the most part, the visiting police forces are going to be the forces of neighboring member states, the UK, United States, the Dutch Netherlands, and France for some reason. But my understanding again is that a lot of the immunities are the same across the board. So I'm not sure exactly what the need, in their home jurisdiction, would be similar to what exists for the police here. So I'm not sure exactly why the need under Section 18 to include increased prosecution from immunity, particularly as it goes on to create jurisdiction for the local courts in certain circumstances and the foreign courts in other circumstances. To me, there's a little bit of inconsistency there. Additionally, the section with regard to where is it? Section just bear with me because I've missed the section. There's a section which deals with 23, which deals with coroner's inquests and the power to stop coroner's inquests where it regards or is associated with someone who is related to the visiting forces. Again, I'm not sure exactly what this section is aimed at and why it's necessary. To my mind, as has been done in the past with, for example, when we have trade winds and these sorts of police exchanges, all that happens is that you treat the officer as a member of the St. Lucia Police Force, and then all the immunities and powers that normally apply to a police officer apply to them. I don't understand the need for these additional immunities and exactly what the extent. Perhaps my concern is I'm not sure exactly what the limit of these additional immunities are, where they extend to, and particularly as I pointed out, there's still apparently some liability for criminal activities under section 11, I believe it is. How exactly that criminal jurisdiction arises, where it arises, is not clear to me. I do note that under section 13, that the government of St. Lucia becomes liable in tort, at least, for any actions or defaults on the part of these visiting police officers. So again, there is clearly an intent that liability is to arise in certain circumstances. And for my mind, an ease of application, the simplest thing would have been to just say that they are members of the St. Lucia Police Force, they have all the rights and powers. I can understand then in that case including section 13, because then you are then extending the tortious liability to them. But again, I don't understand the section 23, which deals with coroner's inquests and stopping coroner's inquests, and section 8, which deals with the immunities from prosecution. So perhaps and I understand that obviously these are being dictated by ICC Cricket World Cup, and perhaps the leader of government business can address our very specific concerns. Other than that, I mean, I understand the nature of the bill and why it's necessary, but as I said, to me and to my mind, it could have been achieved in a much simpler and much easier to understand manner. Thank you, Madam President.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. I just took a few notes there while my colleagues were speaking. Madam President, like I did when I introduced the bill, it is clearly a conditional arrangement, and it is an event that is an international event. We understand that there are basic principles of law enforcement that need to be adhered to. It is not the first time in our country that we would have had the services of persons outside of our regular police jurisdiction or police force operating here. Notably, 5 out of the 6 regional territories that are participating in the World Cup are members of the RSS. So it means that there are certain protocols that would have already applied once they get to that territory, excluding Trinidad. And so they would have been sworn in, as was done when we had the special operation. But Madam President, when you have countries that are outside of these jurisdictions, you saw France and other places, there are other benefits to that collaboration that does not suggest that there is any attempt to compromise or to undermine the local police force. For example, during the operation, during the period of time, there is need for proper communication protocols to be in place. And some of these conditions will require that outside of what your regular local police would have been using in terms of their communication and their operations, you may have to allow for these to be used by those persons on the outside who normally would not have been had access to these facilities. Madam President, I think we should look at this not as an issue where there is suppression or violation of our security services, but as an opportunity for our local police force to collaborate and cooperate with the outside, if you want to call them, police force, external police force people, to be able to provide the necessary security. I noted that Senator Fede tried his best to try to find reasons in the various areas he quoted to support Section 8 when he showed concern about immunity. But everything he read, and I listened carefully, every section he read, Madam President, seemed to have been giving support to the fact that the local jurisdiction has measures in place should there be any default or any violation on the part of the visiting police officers. And at some point, I kind of whispered across, but this is not helping your argument. I think he heard me, and then he had to leave it alone. But Madam President, the spirit within which this is being done And I think Senator Lee also pointed out a couple of interesting areas that I believe, under normal circumstances, would be very questionable. But, Madam President, this is an effort, like I said, that all of the regional territories that are hosting the ICC World Cup, they have issues in their jurisdictions, they have police forces, they have laws, they have commissioners of police, they have their protocols. But this is an arrangement that is conditional, and that is why it is for a certain period. And I believe that if we have to start worrying about what if, and what if, I did mention the tribunal, for example, so there is recourse should certain things happen. But if we have to sit and complain about what if, the World Cup would have come and gone, and St. Lucia would not have benefited. So we need to weigh the pros and the cons, and I am convinced that given some of the concerns that you will always have when it comes to national security, there's never going to be a perfect situation when it deals with national security. There is always going to be a what if. And even if we brought no outside police here, and we had relied solely upon our local police, we would still be sitting in this chamber and wondering, what if? In other words, if something were to happen that we could not manage, we may have been saying, what if we had brought in outside support? So there is always going to be a risk associated with certain decisions, but I believe the bigger picture is that this is necessary to satisfy the international organizers, the ICC, that St. Lucia, like the other the venues of the World Cup, is prepared to engage the external police forces so that the security in this country is beefed up, is improved, and collaboration will take place to make sure that the event is safe. So I think we also need to look at the spirit within which this piece of legislation is being brought here. And while I will admit that it can never be all the way perfect, but I think the intention is clear, and I believe that in good faith, we expect that it will work out and that we would have had a successful World Cup. We have hosted World Cups before, we have hosted ICC before, and the same arrangements have to be made. And the next time we host World Cups, now that we have terrorism legislation, we have all kinds of threats that we didn't have before, we may find that there may be even greater requirements, more expectations, maybe even more. You might have to hear about soldiers coming in. You never know. Depending on who is visiting your country, Madam President, there are going to be requirements. I sat here in the Parliament just across there, and a president was addressing the St. Lucia Parliament in this chamber, and I could see his security detail right behind him, inside here. And it had to be because there must have been a condition that required that this president, who we all love, and we found his visit was well appreciated, had to have had certain people. And when I looked outside, I saw more people. We never had those here. When we come here to Parliament, we have our local police, we have security. But because of the presence of the President of Guyana, I can say, we saw that there was a difference in the way the logistics and the security was arranged. And that is because you had a special guest, you had a special condition that required special arrangements. So are we going to say that he could not have had an armed detailed security in our chamber? No. Otherwise, you would say, no thanks, I'm not coming to your country. Madam President, there's a general rule that when you travel, you don't have firearms. But we know that certain world leaders, when they travel to your country, you better be prepared to allow certain people to come in with them with certain things that you normally don't allow. It is just a normal part of what happens when you have, quote-unquote, VIPs in your country. And that is what the World Cup does. When there is a World Cup, there are very VIPs who will come to your country only on condition that certain things are in place, including their transportation, their security detail, the hotels they live in, or they are going to be in. You have to make special arrangements. And we have to be prepared to accommodate that. If not, we'll never host a world event. The opposition cannot pretend that it's as if we're just doing that to undermine our police. We are not. We recognize the need for it. We are prepared to do like the other neighbors, and we believe that it is in good faith. And with that, we will be able to meet the requirements by ICC to be able to host a successful World Cup. And that is the spirit within which I present this piece of legislation for the approval of the Senate, Madam President.
Senators, the question is that the Visiting Police Forces ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as have that opinion say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to regulate the performance of official duties in St. Lucia by members of police forces visiting St. Lucia and civilian personnel attached to the police forces during the period of Cricket World Cup West Indies 2024 and related matters.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 3.
Application.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 4.
Act to bind the crown.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 1, clauses 5 to 10.
Designated states and visiting police force.
Part 1, clauses 5 to 10 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 2, clauses 11 to 12.
Jurisdiction.
Part 2, clauses 11 to 12 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 3, clauses 13 to 17.
Claims against visiting police forces.
Part 3, clauses 13 to 17 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 4, Part 4, beg your pardon, clauses 18 to 21.
Taxation.
Part 4, clauses 18 to 21 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 5, clauses 22 to 24.
Miscellaneous.
Part 5, clauses 22 to 24 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Schedule.
Designated states.
Schedule stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause, let's go this again. Clause, schedule stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Senators, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the Visiting Police Forces ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies bill went through committee stage without amendments. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg that the report of the committee be adopted and that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Visiting Police Forces ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Visiting Police Forces ICC Cricket World Cup Act 2024.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg present for second reading a bill shortly entitled, for first reading, a bill shortly entitled ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies.
ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Pardon me, Madam President, I was moving a little too fast. Madam President, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 49-2 to enable this bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order number 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed, Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to move for the second reading of a bill shortly entitled ICC World Cup West Indies. Madam President, this bill is very similar in terms of purpose with the previous one, except that in this case, it is really seeking to provide or to allow for standing operating procedures that exist in hosting world events to obtain, well, global events to obtain here. There are certain specific legislative provisions that have to be made, Madam President, for host countries, and I have named the countries before, for hosting the Cricket World Cup. There are special arrangements that have to be made with regard to advertising, protection of images, image rights, prohibited items, and a whole lot of other very specific procedures. This bill, again, Madam President, will be required in the other territories. In fact, Barbados recently passed that one ahead of us, and we know that the other territories will do likewise. Again, Madam President, knowing that the West Indies, the ICC World Cup will be jointly hosted by the West Indies and the United States, we know that that is opportunity for a lot of exposure, and various territories want to protect certain rights, and therefore this bill gives them that, as well as giving the ICC certain assurances. Madam President, it requires, for example, that there must be host venue agreements between ICC World Cup and Cricket West Indies as a subsidiary to the West Indies Cricket Board. So St. Lucia will be hosting a number of matches. Now, when your venue has been designated an official venue, you basically have to hand over the venue to the ICC. So for that period of time, the Darren Sammy Cricket Ground, for example, will not technically be our venue. It will be handed over to the ICC. It becomes their domain, so to speak, and they will decide what goes on there. I remember the discussion with a colleague where during that time, even government ministers and other local dignitaries have to abide by certain regulations. There are certain areas where certain people are not allowed to go. And that is not because we don't think that, yes, you're in my country and I can just do whatever I want. Just imagine you have a Virat Kohli at the Darren Sammy Cricket Ground and maybe a Joe Root in the same place. That I know the Leader of Opposition Business will not like to hear, because if he thinks that England and Australia will never play here. But that can happen where you have global mega stars in the same place, and aside from security, there are other restrictions that have to be agreed to and that must apply, because at that time, the Bosejo Cricket Ground, the Darren Sammy Cricket Ground would not be what we normally know it to be, as just anybody can just go in and do whatever they want. And so these basically are giving the ICC certain privileges that will apply because there are matches that will be held on the 15th, for example, Madam President, of June, the 16th, the 17th, the 19th, the 21st, and the 24th. Lots of matches. There'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 match days. And on these match days and during that period, there are certain conditions that we must provide, but for us to do that, we basically have to hand over the venue to the ICC. Madam President, special arrangements are required to stage the World Cup, and these are provided by the bill. And these will be administered by the Minister for Sports, who has certain responsibilities under that bill. One of these arrangements, Madam President, is that before a playing field or an area is used for the match, the Minister of Sports must declare the area as a Cricket West Indies 2024 venue in accordance with the bill. And that's exactly what I was saying. So before the people can actually come in there and say they're playing a game, our minister must declare that a venue for ICC. And it would require a declaration, for example, to be published in the Gazette and in at least one newspaper and circulated. So these are legal procedures that tell you that during that time, it's not business as usual, and this legislation deals with that. It gives, for example, the Minister for Sports, Madam President, to declare that the period under review, or the period that is being considered, that some special arrangements can be made for what is being delivered within that venue, and also to be regulated by the Commissioner of Police through issues directed. So again, that tells you that there will be collaboration between the authority, the minister with authority responsibility for sports, and the commissioner. There are a number of other arrangements that have to be made with regard to tickets, Madam President, broadcasting, positioning of certain media personnel, restricted areas and restricted items, lots and lots of issues that are to be adhered to. But it means that at that point, the legislation that we pass here must give the ICC certain rights and privileges to enforce these at the venue. Finally, I just want to, sorry, Madam President, mention one of those is advertising. We know about ambush marketing and a lot of those things that happen. There are restrictions with advertising that will require, for example, that certain items are prohibited on certain buildings and structures, and commercial broadcasting and telecasting, recording, filming, and all of those within certain areas, either within the venue or near the venue. So you might not be able to walk in with your, and I think we practice that even in the Parliament. You can't walk in with your Blue Waters bottle if the main sponsor is another company. So we have to acknowledge that this is a world event, and we have done it before, and I have every confidence that this piece of legislation is going to give support to the one we just passed to ensure that we meet all of the requirements, whether it is security, whether it is procedural, whether it is logistical, to allow for our country to host a successful World Cup. And like I did with the previous bill, Madam President, I ask that we give support to this bill to facilitate a successful hosting of this year's 2024 ICC World Cup in St. Lucia. I thank you, Madam President.
Senators, the question is that the ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies bill be read a second time. Senator Fede.
Thank you, Madam President. The more I go through this bill, the more it depresses me. Madam President, I think that my request, my plea, my beg of the government is to please share with us the cost. I am still waiting on the government side to provide us with any ballpark figure, any guesstimate of what the cost of the World Cup really is. If you haven't done the proper analysis, I do understand, but just give us some figure. What is the total cost? I ask that, Madam President, because as we go through and peruse the various sections of the bill, we see that there is a very nice suite of concessions that are exempted here for Cricket World Cup. We see that public liability is waived for Cricket World Cup. And I'll go through the various claims that I've made very early on in my submission to show you how egregious some of these clauses are. Madam President, I say this to say that the time has come for countries within the Caribbean to jointly rethink the overarching agreement as it relates to how they host these events. Now, I don't have a cost to go by because, Madam President, there are a series of concerns which I'll raise as outlined in this act, and I finally, Madam President, we get some details in what some of the conditions the bill, of the specificity of some of these clauses. We didn't have it before because outlined, we didn't get all of the clauses and the concerns that are quoted. So, Madam President, I looked at, for example, Section 7, where it shows that Cricket West Indies, that is responsible for the production and distribution of tickets. And it goes on to itemize that the profits and the sale and everything, all of the revenue goes to Cricket West Indies, and that's standard. Yes, it is. Hence my previous call for governments really to rethink these agreements, because while all of the benefits are going to Cricket West Indies and the ICC, we will see, Madam President, that when it comes to the liability of hosting Cricket World Cup, that the liability is left with the state, and I'll show you. So while Cricket West Indies and the ICC and their affiliates have clearly negotiated a deal to say, look, all of the profits, all of the revenue centers will go to us. Yeah? Madam President, Section 8 speaks to work permits. I don't know whether in the general agreement whether there's a number in terms of the work permits that the government has agreed to in this agreement, but there's a provision here in the legislation, Madam President, which speaks to the granting of work permits. And it raises a question for me, because while the government would like us to believe that there are so many jobs that will be created as a result of hosting Cricket World Cup, we must then ask the question, how many of these jobs are going to be for people coming in, and that we need to provide or to waive work permits for, and how many are going to be local. So we can understand and we expect that when the government is constructing the stadium, that we're going to use taxpayers' money. But as you hand over the stadium to the ICC, and they're going to now operate the event, and they're going to own the event, and they become the operators and managers of the venue, it then begs the question, how many jobs will the ICC, the Cricket West Indies, a consortium, how many jobs are they going to be providing for the operational phase to local St. Lucians? That number is important, Madam President, in light of the work permit clause in the provision, which reads, a permit to work in St. Lucia in relation to Cricket World Cup 2024 and any approval or documentation required for such purpose by any designated person shall be provided by the minister responsible for labor. Shall. Doesn't say maybe. The Minister of Labor does not have a choice under this legislation that we're about to pass. And so I would love to see the agreement, Madam President, to tell us when. And it even goes on to say, Madam President, that there is a specific time frame by which those work permits have to be presented. Those work permits for persons coming in by the ICC or Cricket West Indies have to be within 7 days of being requested and remains valid and effective until the conclusion of Cricket World Cup 2024. Goes on to say, Madam President, a work permit under subsection 1 must be provided within the period stated under subsection 1, where the applicant complies with the requirements stipulated by the minister responsible for labor. So we see, Madam President, that there is an intention by the government, based on this law that we're about to pass, that we're going to be granting work permits for employees who are not resident in St. Lucia to work in Cricket World Cup. That's standard. That has happened before. Yes. But the question becomes how many? And the question becomes, at the expense, do we have some of these skills in St. Lucia? What are those skills that Cricket World Cup are applying for work permit for? Are we going to be crowding out and abandoning St. Lucians who have the skills to do those jobs right here in St. Lucia? Or are we going to go ahead and carte blanche give ICC World Cup and Cricket West Indies everything that they want? I ask these questions, Madam President, not because that this is not normal. I ask these questions because in every situation, Madam President, they are very, very important specifics that must be answered. And we're not getting the specifics unless we answer the question. Up to now, Madam President, I don't know how much, and we've been begging from this morning, what is the cost of Cricket World Cup? Why is the government not telling us what the real cost of this event is? We go on, Madam President, in section 9, which speaks to a whole slew of taxes, import and export duties that the government is waiving for the hosting of this event. And again, details in the foregone revenue is very important here. And I know it annoys the government, Madam President, that we keep asking, but we want to know, Madam President, what is it costing the country to grant these concessions to allow to come in duty-free, personal effects, food supplies and beverages, medical supplies, medical instruments and pharmaceuticals, sporting equipment, promotional signage. There are a whole host, a whole list, even photography, Madam President, uniforms, and all that stuff. It then begs the question whether do we not have local shops, local business people who can provide those uniforms? Has the government now create linkages between the suppliers of trophies and uniforms in St. Lucia so that the local business sector will get some of that action as well? Mr. President, that's important because if that work is not done, and we have now got to grant Cricket West Indies the concession, even on gifts and awards and trophies and medals and flags and uniforms and costumes, then what is being done to safeguard the local business sector who are capable of doing this? Mr. President, it gets interesting. In section 10 of the legislation, it speaks to, so while Cricket West Indies says, look, we're responsible, we're going to sell the tickets, we're going to take the money, but we don't want to be charged any taxes. So it goes on to say in section 10 of the legislation that the government, clearly by bringing this bill to Parliament, concedes to that and says, well, no taxes required. So while people pay on lottery tickets in St. Lucia, they're granting Cricket West Indies the total exemption, no tax, none of these fees or government charges that they would charge on someone going in a local bar to play those casino games. Those taxes don't apply in these instances. That's the government's prerogative, Mr. President. It gets very interesting in section 16.4 of the legislation. This is where it gets interesting. So we see that in a previous section above, that the stadium is handed over, as the leader of government business stated, to ICC, International Cricket Council. It is also handed over to Cricket West Indies. So they own the Darren Sammy Stadium for the duration of the World Cup. So in a temporary arrangement, the government says, you are responsible, you can tell whoever to enter, you are in control of who leaves, who enters, when they come, and all of that stuff. But section 16.4 says this. So while they are in charge, while they are operating the games, while it is their management of the event, it goes on to say this, Mr. President, that the owners of the stadium, and I read, WICB, Cricket West Indies, and ICC or the IBC shall not be liable as a result of the operation of this section. 4. A. Any suit, action proceedings. So you've given over the stadium to them. You've said Cricket West Indies, ICC, WICB, you own the stadium. It's your event. You own it. You operate the event. You manage the event. You are in total control. But then you are not allowed to bring any suit proceedings, action, or proceedings against them. It says to pay compensation to a member, guest, or club card holder, or to any other person under subsection 2. So if you've got a complaint, if you slip and fall, if there is any public situation within the stadium, Cricket West Indies is saying that based on this law we're passing, no member of the public can take them to court. They're not liable. So it begs the question then, who's liable? Mr. President, who then becomes liable should something happen as it relates to the safety of the patrons going to the Darren Sammy Stadium on the days and during the matches? C. Section 16, subsection 4C. It says that they are also not liable to reimburse any person under paragraph B for the whole or a portion of any payment made by such a person to obtain certain rights, entitlements, or privileges. Now, you can't want your cake and eat it. If we are going to hand over the stadium to Cricket West Indies and to the ICC, and we said, you own it, you operate the event, then why is it that you don't want to be liable when we, the state, is not in control of what goes on in the operations of Cricket World Cup? It's a very, very important question. The government has to answer to say that you sign over the stadium, yes, great. And I understand that the leader of government business will say that many countries have done this. But not because many countries have done this, it means that we need to expose our people. What safeguards are being made for any accidents? If someone goes there and they break their leg because of negligence on the part of the operators of the event, what safeguards, what compensation is going to be had because of that negligence on the part of the people that have operated this event? Now, if it is that the government has taken on the liability, then the government needs to say that. But I don't see, Mr. President, any safeguard in the legislation, and I do apologize in advance if it's here and I didn't see it, but I haven't seen it, Mr. President, in the legislation where you are safeguarding the liability. Accidents happen in mass crowd events. People get hurt. It is quite possible. Security due diligence, sometimes people pass through them. Things happen. Shootings happen in mass crowd events. Who is responsible should someone get hurt? This is very, very, very crucial. Now, I raise these questions because, Mr. President, for a long time, and this is my opinion, I have held the view that this business by certain international bodies, where they come to governments as their ATM machines for the hosting and funding of facilities, but don't allow governments to have an appropriate say on the appropriate matters as it relates to the development of respective sports within the jurisdictions, which in my view, Mr. President, forms an essential part of government's overall national development of respective countries, but yet governments are asked to back off as it relates to that conversation. Now, I will submit a caution to say to this House that I am not by any means suggesting that there should be excessive political interference ever by governments of respective territories of the world. But if you're asking taxpayers to come forward and to invest millions, hundreds of millions sometimes, we see in the hosting of the Brazil World Cup, how much they have had to spend. And the opportunity cost that they have lost in making those investments towards the development of their country, in having to choose between hosting the World Cup and, Mr. President, other national development initiatives, it tells you that the countries are making a significant sacrifice. And the time, therefore, has actually come for governments to rethink these deals. And governments to do the proper analysis to ask ourselves whether we're getting the requisite returns that we think we are on the surface. That's an important question that this government has failed to answer all day today. And we have asked, what is the cost? Nobody can tell us. We are begging since this morning. But yet the government would like us to take this proposal seriously. Mr. President, the ICC and the WICB says we're going to take the profits, we're going to take the revenue. The ICC and the WICB says to the government, turn over the ownership of the facility to us for the entire duration of the World Cup. The government has acquiesced and said yes. The ICC and the WICB has said, Mr. President, that we are responsible for the management of the event. Government has said yes. But then the same ICC and WICB has said, if something goes wrong, we are not responsible. How could that ever be fair? Why would we put ourselves in such a bind? And so I don't care who's signing it, Mr. President. That kind of lopsided deal can never ever be right, Mr. President. Never ever be right. Never ever be right. That on the one hand, you create this two-tier police where your local police is treated differently from the foreign police that they're bringing in. On the other hand, you give away the rights and management of the stadium and the games, which I think is in order. But I believe that the person who is managing the event should take full responsibility for the liabilities as well. Mr. President, I thank you for your indulgence.
Reader of Government Business.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Mr. Deputy President, suspect the Leader of Opposition is trying to make sure we don't go to jazz this evening. Mr. Deputy President, I sat there and had to go through the ordeal of listening to the Senator Fede posturing in this chamber as a man or an individual who is so concerned about the welfare of this country and what it means for us to get involved in meeting the conditions set by the ICC, reputable international organization that runs the business of one of the most lucrative sports, multi-billion-dollar sporting industry, cricket. In the world, Mr. Deputy President, the ICC is not a TOR king. Mr. Deputy President, the ICC is not a Jack Lamb. Mr. President, the ICC is not a Hell City Cayman. And I can go on. Mr. President, this is an organization that has hosted every 2 years and every 4 years various international standard competitions that have been successful in countries such as India, the UK, Australia, South Africa, the Caribbean, all over the world. They know what they're doing, Mr. President, and we know that they know what they're doing. And to come to this chamber and to posture as if it's some secret deal that the government of St. Lucia is unilaterally making with somebody in the ICC, that we are giving up concessions and we should not do this and we should not do that and it's time for us to not this. Mr. Deputy President, you would swear that this is somebody who has certainly found his patriotic cap to put on. Exposing our people. Exposing our people, Mr. President. To what? We're not exposing our people to go and have vaccines tried on them, Mr. President. We're not doing that. We're not exposing our people to having retrofitting a place that our tax money is paying for. We're paying salaries for. We're not doing that, Madam, Mr. Deputy President. We are trying to meet conditions that are set not by the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party, not by Philip J. Pierre, not by any arbitrary individual, by a reputable international sporting agency, the ICC, for us to be able to host, to be one of the 6 countries hosting a World Cup. It's a privilege. Exactly. But I have to endure this hypocrisy when we could have been doing other things. For a member of the opposition who sat in a cabinet when this country compromised almost everything that we had. Mr. Deputy President, I have a little advice for him. Maybe one day when his grandson gets into government again, you can advise him to probably, the next time St. Lucia will host a World Cup, and they want to posture like that, advise him to form a committee of ministers for the region, and maybe he can chair it, and put this forward and tell the ICC, if you're not going to do this, we don't want your World Cup. But until then, Mr. Deputy President, we understand that for you to get, you have to give. When you give concessions to hoteliers and to investors, it's because you know that they're going to bring in benefits to your country. Mr. Deputy President, I heard the member talking about work permits. Work permits? Are you telling me that St. Lucia is about to host an international agency? You have people working for major global media houses, Fox Sports from the UK, ESPN, Star Sports from Australia. And these people are going to come here with their technical people to cover up an event. And you're questioning, why are we giving work permits? I mean, this is an argument, Madam, Mr. Deputy President. Who are we giving the work permits to?
Mr. President.
Remember the process. Put on your light first, you get acknowledged, and then Senator Fede.
Yeah. So, Mr. President, I stand on a point of order. Again, the member continues to mislead the House. To suggest that I'm questioning why they're giving work permits is very far from the truth. What I've said, Mr. President, is how many work permits. I did say that it is quite normal. I did say that. And I did repeat that several times so that I will not be misconstrued. But the member, for his own reasons, are coming here and misrepresent my statements. Mr. President, I want the member to be guided. I did not say why you're doing work permits. That's wrong. How many would be the question, and what's the cost, since you're on the floor?
Thank you. Yes, on Leader of Government Business, the point made by Senator Fede is noted. He did ask the question rather than saying that you ought not to be doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. And he also tried to ask 2 more questions that I don't think he stood to ask, but that's the nature of the gentleman. Mr. President, so the question is, how many work permits? Is that the question? How many work permits? You can't tell us how many passports you gave away. We waited for reports that never came. Yes. You can't tell us how much our vaccine money that we couldn't get back. And you're asking me how many work permits that we're going to issue to people who are coming here to cover an international event, to give our country global recognition. How many work permits?
Senator Fede?
Yeah, Mr. President, I know that the members have to go to jazz, and I really am very sorry to...
Why are you rising?
Sorry, Mr. President, I rise in a point of order. The member has stated that we cannot tell them how many passports we sold. Mr. President, on more than one occasion, and I happen to have a breakdown on all of the passports that have been sold, and I'm going to make it a document of the House because it has been made several times in this House, Mr. President, by the United Workers' Party administration. The minister with responsibility for CIP, former Prime Minister Alan Shastney, used to come to the House and he used to read out by name
hold on, okay.
every single...
Senator Fede,
Yes.
Fede, your point of order is what exactly?
The member saying that we cannot tell them how many passports that we sold is incorrect, and that is misleading of the House. We have always come and we have always submitted the names of the passport. The people who are guilty of this charge is the St. Lucia Labour Party administration.
Okay, just now.
Who will not sign the deal.
Yeah, there's no need for pontificating. You said that it's incorrect. You have evidence to the contrary. You'll make a document of the House.
Correct.
Thank you. I would suggest that you move on as well.
I will, Senator.
Thank you.
I will, Deputy. I will. You see, the attempt is to take that debate down a road that has nothing to do with ICC. But you see, I'm not a rookie in this place, Mr. Deputy. That's not going to work. And that's not an opportunity for you to come and talk about Alan Shastney. We are talking about ICC cricket and the opportunities for the people of this country. And you're asking me how many I'm supposed to come to this chamber when we are seeking to get conditions, pass legislation to provide conditions that are required by the ICC, and your question is how many work permits we're giving? Mr. Deputy President, I shall move on. The member also suggested that maybe we should have, and I hope I heard him right, I know he might write, so maybe he can write on a point of elucidation, that the local business sector, we should be considering providing uniforms. So, what are countries playing here? Afghanistan versus West Indies. We have, which other countries do we have here? We have about 4, 5, 6 other countries. So, Mr. Deputy, so the countries that are going to play in St. Lucia, St. Lucia is hosting. I don't know. Are we supposed to be providing them with uniforms? Are we? I mean, Mr. Deputy, I really don't understand what exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really sorry, but this is. I'm sorry, Mr. President.
Uniforms.
Rising this often. Again, we have a misrepresentation of the truth. I went through the section of the legislation. Sorry, I stand on a point of order, Mr.
Thank you.
The member is misleading the House. Again, I did outline in the section that deals with import duties, and its gifts, its trophies, its plaques, its signage, its marketing paraphernalia, its printing materials, and a whole host of those things I read out, Mr. President. And what I'm talking about, what about those people that we know in this country that do supply all of those services? Are there any linkages that have been made with them as we consider these concessions to the ICC? That was the question. So
yeah, I was about to ask you, because you elucidated, I was about to ask you exactly what are you saying that he's saying that's incorrect?
But he's just saying, I said uniforms, yeah? But I'm saying to him that this is what I'm asking, a whole gamut of services that they are supposed to provide. And it's listed on the section 10, I believe, of the legislation where it talks about the importation of
okay.
Section 10.
Thank you, Senator.
Section 10.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Honorable Leader of Government Business, please continue.
Mr. Deputy, his light is still on. Mr. Deputy, when the member rises on a point of elucidation and tries to get away by saying he's on a point of order, I think it is deceptive. Because I simply repeated a statement the member made. He made the statement on his feet about uniforms. I used the word uniforms. That's all I said. I didn't say anything else. and I asked a question about uniforms. Now, if he wanted to elucidate and say, well, I didn't only mean uniforms, I meant trophies and so on, then he should stand on a point of order, on a point of elucidation, and allow me to decide whether I should yield. But he's playing tricks. He's standing on a point of order, and then he's elucidating. Mr. Deputy President, let me move on from uniforms. The members stood up looking for all possible, probable, highly unlikely situations that can come up in an ICC World Cup event. We have seen ICC World Cup events hosted around the world. There can be no way that you have a global event and you will not have incidents. That is bound to happen. And so why is the member digging into everything he can find to create every bit of doubt and possibility that this may happen, what if that happens, and what do we do, when it is an event that is being hosted by an organization that is probably best at doing what it's doing. And it's saying to us, this is the way we do our event. You want to participate, here are the conditions under which we will allow you to participate. When somebody applies for a passport or for a driver's license, the agency, the immigration department or the passport department will provide you with specific, you have to bring your ID, you have to do this, you have to take a picture of a certain size. There are specific requirements. You have to do an interview sometimes, depending on your situation. There are certain conditions under which, if you want the passport, you must adhere to. It is a normal practice. If you want to go to the US, don't send your passport to Barbados. Don't apply and say, I want a passport, but I'm not applying. You don't want a people's passport, don't apply. You want to be part of the World Cup. St. Lucia is saying, we are one of the 6 Caribbean islands that has made a bid to participate in hosting the World Cup. Many other islands made a bid. We were successful, some of them were not. The ICC is saying to us, for you to be allowed to host our event, it's not our event. This is ICC World Cup. Sapa Ulilaba. It is a world event. ICC is saying, you want to be part of the hosting team? These are the conditions you need to meet so you can be allowed to host. We are just doing that. We are not going out there to harm anybody. Talking about shootings, making it seem as if it's some kind of complot between the ICC and the government of St. Lucia to harm. So what are we going to do? Tell the ICC, keep your World Cup? So that he can come back and say, we missed an opportunity to host, and we could have brought this and we could have done that. Madam, Mr. Deputy President, St. Lucia will endeavor to be one of the host countries in every ICC World Cup. Every single one of them. We have one of the best venues in the region. We have the best curator in the region in the person of Kent Crafton. We have the best facilities. We have the most picturesque venue. We have in fact, the surface at Beauséjour is the #1 surface in the region when it comes to true bounce and pace and giving you a proper surface for balance between bat and ball. And the whole world knows that. So, Mr. Deputy President, this is what the member knows. That he realizes that this is a great opportunity for St. Lucians to benefit from this world event. And I hope today, we have jazz this week. I hope certain people who are not listening, certain major sporting people in the region who know St. Lucia, who are not paying attention and listening to what this member just did. I mean, you're standing in a parliament where this is a national event, where everybody, can you imagine how a Bajan would stand up in the parliament knowing that they're hosting World Cup to jump on this and give the government so much encouragement, opposition or anywhere? You are standing here as a St. Lucian parliamentarian and you're beating up on all possibilities, things that can go wrong because we are hosting a World Cup. A World Cup?
Can you imagine? Shameful.
Mr. Deputy President, I am not one to get emotional on my feet when I speak, but I believe today the opposition has really, really gone to an all-time low. Not to be able to say for once We recognize there are challenges. We recognize we have to give up certain little things, but we are happy to be part of a government and a parliament where St. Lucia is hosting a global event, and we give support to your efforts. At least say so. You cannot say that. Super ça fait ça, Monsieur President, massa fait bao. But I will say again, this is not the last time we're going to host World Cups. World Cups will continue to come. England or no England. We will continue to bid, joint bid or single bid. We will continue to work with the ICC, to work with any international organization that is prepared to host big events here. And we know the reason is because there are benefits to all of us. He'll benefit too, you know, Mr. Deputy President. If we didn't have to go to jazz, I would have told him I would benefit, because I know he would be jumping up and down in his chair. I know how to make him jump up and down in his chair, because I just have to say a certain word. But tonight, I am not interested in that. I have decided that we have to keep this debate at a certain standard. You know, there are benefits for a lot of people, including himself, when the World Cup comes. And I hope he offers special concessions to the guests during the month of June and July. Don't come here and behave as if there is something so wrong and there is so much concern. He must be licking his lips, Mr. President, at some of the good business he will get. And I'm happy for him. I'm happy for him, because we encourage local entrepreneurs in this country. So, Mr. Deputy President, lest I cause this debate to descend to any level that we are not accustomed to in this chamber, I will thank members who have contributed to this debate. I look forward to the benefits of this World Cup to this country, and I thank in advance the police force, the Minister for Home Affairs, the Prime Minister, the Minister for Sports, the Cricket Association, and all the other agencies, NEMO, the medical fraternity, the emergency people, the transportation sector, and entrepreneurs like himself, all of those who are going to participate. I thank them in advance for the way in which we are all going to come together to make sure that we have a successful hosting of the 2024 ICC Men's T20 Cricket World Cup. I thank you, Mr. Deputy.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to make provisions for the fulfillment of the commitment of St. Lucia to the efficient and effective staging of ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies 2024 and for related matters.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 3.
Act to bind Crown.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 1, clauses 4 to 22.
CWC 2024 special arrangements.
4 to 22. 4 to 22.
2, so does that include section 16 as well?
Yes.
Okay, so I just have a suggestion here, Mr. President. Section 16.4, where it reads, sorry, so let me pull it up. I have it digitally. It says that the owners of the stadium, WRCB Cricket World Cup, WRCB Cricket West Indies, and the ICC or IBC shall not be liable as a result of the operation of this section for any suit, action, or proceedings to pay compensation to a member, guest, or club card holder, or any other person under subsection 2, or C, to reimburse any person under paragraph B for the whole or for a portion of any payment made by such a person to obtain certain rights, entitlements, or privileges. Mr. President, Mr. Chair, in light of the very passionate debate on the floor as it pertains to this side, I glean that the government is taking the responsibility should there be any public liability. So may we institute a clause, maybe an additional clause in this section to say that maybe the normal public liability insurance of the stadium, which is the permanent ownership of the government of St. Lucia, will then apply. But because I think it is important to improve this bill because the ICC and the WICB has actually found it necessary to remove themselves from any liability should there be an accident, should there be a public emergency of any kind. And so therefore, I want to propose to the government side, in the interest of protecting the patrons of the stadium, which include a good bit of the St. Lucian people, that maybe they would want to institute an additional clause to help to improve the legislation, which will then safeguard the safety of the patrons going to the stadium. That's my submission, really.
Any response?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the member does not understand the section. Section 16 says members' entitlements during a match period, and I think it's absolutely important for us to read the before and after. Part 1 says, this section applies to the members of any organization, association, club, or similar body or person who has any entitlement in a stadium, whether through the exercise of rights or otherwise. 2, during a match period, and it goes on to state that you are not able to exercise your right. This membership, these members refer to persons who are part of organizations, clubs. So say, for example, you would ordinarily have access to the Darren Sammy cricket ground to have a cricket training. You are not able to do that at that point. And just for further elucidation, any event that is hosted in St. Lucia, any mass crowd event, must go through the mass crowd events checklist for the police to approve, and that will include public liability insurance. So that is just automatic, but I think he has misunderstood what members mean, and members refer to members of clubs or associations.
And the persons are referring to who?
Members of clubs or associations. Whether you come as a club or whether you come as an individual, you cannot exercise your right as a member, especially during a match, which Part 2 speaks about.
Yeah, thank you for that. I believe the interpretation that has been, the explanation given by Senator Jawa here is correct. What this is actually doing is suspending any, so for example, box holders who would have a right to enter the stadium at any time they want because they hold a box. Their rights would be suspended during the course of the match, minister's box, etc. And so they cannot then bring any claim for the fact that they've been barred or prevented from entering the stadium as a result. Okay, thank you. Any other comments? No? Okay. So Part 1 stands part of the bill? Aye. Part 2, clauses 23 to 26.
Control of advertising.
Part 2, clauses 23 to 26 stands part of the bill? Aye. Part 3, clauses 27 to 38.
Protection of CWC 2024 marks, indicia, and images.
Part 3, clauses 27 to 38 stands part of the bill? Aye. Part 4, clauses 39 to 46.
Remedies.
Part 4, clauses 39 to 46 stands part of the bill? Aye. Part 5, clauses 47 to 50.
Miscellaneous.
Part 5, clauses 47 to 50 stands part of the bill? Aye. Schedule 1.
Prohibited items.
Schedule 1 stands part of the bill? Aye. Schedule 2.
CWC 2024 indicia and CWC 2024 images.
Schedule 2 stands part of the bill?
Aye.
Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Aye. Senators, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable Senators, I beg to report that the ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies bill went through committee stage without amendments. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted, that the ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority as the same as follows. This act may be cited as the ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies Act 2024.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I've been looking forward to that part all day. I move that the Senate stand adjourned sine die.
Honourable Senators, the question is that this House do stand adjourned sine die. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many of our contrary opinions say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting adjourned.
All right.
Eh bien, nous finissons notre session Sénat là aujourd'hui avec aujourd'hui c'est Sénat là qui a fait débat et bien discuter. Ça c'est quatre motions. La première motion c'était pour approuver et bien les affaires taxes, c'est calculer VAT sur marchandises pour jouer Cricket World Cup qui passe à cette ici c'est mois prochain. Deuxième motion, le Parlement a autorisé le ministre des Finances pour prêter, enfin ça fait pas prêter, mais pour amasser l'argent ça y a payé bonds en valeur 64 millions de dollars, avec aussi une troisième motion, c'était pour par la ministre des Finances autoriser ministre, ça c'est pour le ministre des Finances jouer une autorisation par le Parlement pour faire une garantie pour prêter l'argent par National Lotteries Authority, ça c'est l'autorité loterie, côté il va faire l'autorat, valait ça c'est comme la regardez comme ça c'est 80 millions de dollars, avec ça c'est l'argent c'est la carrière qui a prêté une banque la Grenade avec Dominique. Et aussi quatrième motion nous avons discuté, ça c'est le ministre des Finances prêter 10 millions de dollars américains, c'est en loan de développement association pour assister et puis ça le cas qui est Blue Economy, ça c'est l'argent pour aider les farmers avec un pêcheur, ça c'est pour aider eux en affaires, les gens qui ont nourri les animaux, par exemple pour prêter de l'eau, de l'eau avec bagage comme ça. Et dernier, mais la territoire, bill pour, c'est des billes de discuter aujourd'hui, pour aider, pour assister avec, ça c'est bagage qui mérité pour aider, assister cette liste et puis World Cup, ça c'est jouer World Cup cricket là qui est passé en pays mois prochain.
Yes, these were the final two bills, Mike. Michael, that for the visiting police forces, special arrangements had to be made in place, and also the last bill, the ICC Cricket World Cup West Indies, had to do with procedural operations during the actual staging of the Cricket World Cup. So this is it. We've come to the end of a long day's session of St. Lucia's Senate. Thank you so much for staying with us for this day. On behalf of our colleagues, the technicians, my name is Virgil Leontine.
Et M. Michael Gaspar, nous avons bon souhait avec nous nous, c'est technicien avec travail GIS qui mène directement Baou, ça qui passe en Sénat la journée. Nous avons mené au studio nous et souhaiter une bonne soirée avec un bon finissement semaine jazz.